Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. Marvel. I inherited the kingdom of shadows. Chapter 81. Blood sprayed from the neck, and Ying Guonan's head was cut off. Everyone packed up their things and was about to retreat. But at this moment, a phone rang on Ying Guonan's body. At that moment, the footsteps of the people who were about to evacuate stopped, and the man's hoarse voice suddenly sounded on the screen. Answer the phone. Yes, head. The strong man holding the screen responded, stepped forward and took out the mobile phone from the corpse, and connected the call. Why did it take you so long to answer the phone? Also, what do you do with what I asked you to do? The live broadcast was cut off halfway through. People, talk. A gloomy voice kept coming from the phone. The tone was full of anger, which could be seen from the anger of the person opposite. He died. At this time, a hoarse voice sounded on the screen, and the other end of the phone suddenly became quiet. For a moment, an atmosphere of silence enveloped the air, making people extremely depressing. After more than 10 seconds, the voice on the other end of the phone rang again. Who are you? How did he die? After the words fell, contemptuous laughter sounded from the screen. You let someone pretend to be me, but you don't even know who I am. As for him, I let someone kill him. You are a Mandarin. The voice on the other end of the phone seemed very surprised, but before he could continue speaking, he was interrupted by the voice on the screen. I prefer to be called Mandarin. Sorry, Mandarin. The person on the other end of the phone resolutely gave in. Let me introduce myself. My name is Killian, and I'm sorry for asking someone to impersonate you. The reason for this is just to use your reputation to complete some of my plans. I wanted to cooperate with you, but I couldn't find you. It's fate to meet you now by such a coincidence. I don't know if the Mandarin is interested in participating in my plan. Killian spoke sincerely, and praised the other party very highly. The Mandarin said noncommittally, why should I cooperate with you? Because we have the same enemy. Tony Stark. He's not my enemy, he's just my prey. The adults disdainfully said. Killian choked on these words, and didn't know how to speak for a moment. However, he is also a character, and he quickly reorganized the language. It doesn't matter whether it's the prey or the enemy, but we have the same goal, so we have a basis for cooperation. What do you think? Moreover, my plan is not only Stark, but also the entire country of America. As long as the plan is successful, the world's most powerful country will eventually be under our control. Killian's eloquence was not very good, but his words did arouse the interest of the Mandarin. Controlling the United States, this kind of thing, is undoubtedly full of temptation for the Mandarin. At the moment, his tone was no longer casual, but became much more serious. Tell me specifically. When the words fell, Killian on the other end of the phone smiled. An hour later, all the strong men evacuated the manor, and then a fire engulfed the entire manor. In the next 24 hours, militants from all over the world rushed to the United States under a mysterious order. The next day, the worst terrorist attack in history broke out in the United States. In just one day, the whole country suffered hundreds of terrorist attacks. A large number of people died in the attack, and numerous economic and property losses were suffered. And it was soon discovered that the place under attack was the same as the one announced in yesterday's absurd live broadcast. For a while, the entire American people panicked. And just when American society was in panic, a handsome middle-aged man stepped into a certain official residence in Washung Shield. Ding dong. The doorbell rang, and the nanny opened the door, looking at the middle-aged man with a trace of vigilance on his face. Who are you looking for? After saying that, the middle-aged man smiled. Don't be nervous, my name is Killian, I'm looking for Mr. Cars, I have an appointment with him. Then wait a moment, I will report. It is good. Killian nodded. Seeing him cooperate so much, the vigilance on the nanny's face dissipated a lot. Soon, the nanny appeared at the door again. Mr. Carl's let you in, he is waiting for you in the study on the second floor. Thank you. After expressing his thanks, Killian walked into the mansion calmly. The residence of this mansion is one of the few people at the pinnacle of power in the United States. Ordinary people step into it. All of them are cautious, but at this moment, Killian is like visiting his own back garden, looking east and west, without any restraint. Soon, Killian went up to the second floor and found the study room. Without knocking on the door, Killian pushed the door open and entered. In the study room, an old white man was sitting at the desk, looking at Killian, who pushed the door straight in. The old man frowned, but he didn't say much. Instead he pointed to the opposite sofa and said, "Sit." "Thank you." Sitting leisurely, Killian looked at Cars and said with a smile, "I usually see you on TV, but now seeing you in real life is a bit unreal." Hearing this, Cars didn't answer, but said directly, "You said, you can make my daughter's legs grow, is it true or not?" Hearing this, Killian leaned back with a smile on the corner of his mouth and said, "Haven't you already watched the video? If it's fake, I think I won't be able to sit across from you," Killian said unceremoniously, and there was not much respect for Cars in his words. This is why Cars kept frowning. He didn't like this guy in front of him. If he hadn't been able to heal his daughter's leg, he would have been kicked out a long time ago. "Okay, tell me your conditions. As long as you can cure my daughter, no matter what the conditions are, I will agree." "Is it?" Killian smiled strangely. "Then what if I ask you to cooperate with me in kidnapping the president?" Swish. Cars instantly stood up from his seat, looking at Killian in shock. "What are you saying?" "I said, what if you cooperate with me in kidnapping the president?" Killian repeated what he said just now word for word, making Cars instantly realize that the guy in front of him was really not joking, he was serious. "Impossible. Don't even think about it." Cars sternly refused, his face full of anger. Looking at his appearance, Killian regained his slow look again. "Nothing is impossible. Everything has a price tag. As long as the price tag is enough, there is nothing that cannot be done. Think of your daughter, lying in bed all these years. How long do you plan to let her live in such a life that is worse than death? Guess what she would think if she knew that her father had a chance to save her but gave up in the end. Besides, kidnapping the president is not a bad thing for you." He went down. "Why don't you go up?" Killian kept talking, and at this moment his words were like the temptation of the devil, making Cars' face change again and again. An oppressive atmosphere filled the study room, and Cars's expression kept changing. At this moment, two villains seemed to appear in his mind. One said and agreed to him, and the other said that he could not promise him. As time passed, the villain who clamored to agree to him gradually gained the upper hand. In the end, Cars smiled helplessly. "Well, you convinced me. You are a devil." "No, I'm just helping you make a choice." Killian smiled. Afterwards, the two talked about some details before Killian left. Seeing Killian leaving, Cars walked into the room on the second floor with a blank expression. A cute girl was lying on the bed, like a sleeping beauty. But what is regrettable is that she is missing a leg, as if a crack appeared on the exquisite porcelain doll, which is regrettable. Quietly watching his daughter, Cars did not speak, and he left the room after a long time. On the other side, Killian, who left the mansion, got in the car and dialed the phone directly. "My lord, the plan is going well, and we can start to act now. However, you need to do me a small favor and help me kidnap someone." "Who?" The Mandarin's voice was as hoarse as ever, as if his throat had been burned. "Virginia Potts. It is good." "No nonsense," the Mandarin agreed without hesitation, and then hung up the phone. Hearing the busy tone on the phone, Killian put the phone aside, looked at himself in the rearview mirror, and said with a smile on his face, "Tony, I didn't expect that. We will meet soon." After speaking, Killian started the vehicle and left the place quickly. And while Killian was planning everything, Tony, on the other hand, had no idea of the impending danger. Orleans, the most powerful man in the United States, holds a lot of power and has to deal with a lot of things every day. Although he has the help of the secretarial team, the workload is not easy at all. Today, he was busy again as usual until late at night, and then he left the White House and returned to his official residence surrounded by bodyguards. The night-shrouded Washung shield, looking at the night scene, he was still thinking about the various things he had to deal with today. Suddenly, there was an explosion sound, and the vehicle at the front of the convoy was directly hit by a rocket, and exploded directly, turning into a ball of flames in the dark night. The sudden change caused Orland's expression to change, but his bodyguard team reacted instantly, quickly got out of the car to build a line of defense, and called for help. Da da da. Fierce gunshots came from both sides of the street, and a group of militants rushed out of the darkness towards the convoy in Orleans. Although his bodyguard team quickly launched a counterattack, their counterattack seemed so weak in the face of this premeditated attack. In just a few minutes, all the bodyguard team in Orleans were killed, and the fierce gunfire stopped. Orleans, who had escaped the accident by curling up in the car, had no time to react to what was going on. With a burst of violent destruction, the car door was opened directly, and a bearded man in full armor appeared in front of him. "Look, who we caught, the leader of the world police, doesn't look very good." The bearded man smiled jokingly, and reached out to grab Orleans himself. Orleans just wanted to ask who they were, but the bearded man didn't give him a chance to talk nonsense, and directly knocked him out with a knife in his hand. Afterwards, 2 members of the 10 Rings gang carried Orleans on their shoulders, and the group quickly disappeared into the street, leaving behind only corpses and burning vehicles. At the same time, the Stark Industrial Building parking lot. After a busy day, Potts took the elevator out of the parking lot, ready to drive home, while her bodyguard team waited early in the parking lot. But when Potts stepped out of the elevator, he immediately smelled a strong smell of blood on the tip of his nose. Immediately, Potts' expression changed, and he wanted to return to the elevator without even thinking about it. But as soon as she turned around, there were 2 more armed men behind her. And a slender figure also slowly walked out of the darkness at this moment. Ta-ta-ta. When the visitor came out of the darkness, Potts immediately saw his appearance clearly, and then frowned. "Who are you?" "Ms. Potts, hello, let me introduce myself. My name is Norris. A friend of mine would like to invite you as a guest. I'm sorry for using this way." Norris looked at Potts politely with a smile on his lips. He had no grudges with Potts, and he didn't intend to get her attention, but his partner asked to see her by name, so he could only go there in person with his busy life. "Really, let's go, I also want to see who wants to see me," Potts said calmly. At this moment her emotions have completely calmed down. As a woman who controls the Chable, Potts may not have superpowers, but her quality is definitely top-notch. The reaction of the hostess being kidnapped in the Dog Blood TV series is destined not to appear on her. Therefore, seeing that the matter was irreversible, she did not continue to struggle, otherwise it would be of no use except to anger the other party. Clap clap clap. Applauding gently, Norris's eyes flashed with admiration. As expected of the president of Stark Industries, this calmness is admirable. "Please come with me," Norris praised with a smile, then turned around and stepped forward to lead the way. Potts followed without hesitation. Soon, 3 cars rushed out of the underground parking lot. However, neither Joris nor the other members of the 10 Rings gang noticed that pairs of scarlet eyes in the carriage had opened at some point, staring at them. The operation of the 10 Rings gang is over, but things are far from over, and even just started. Orleans was kidnapped. As soon as the news came out, the entire upper echelon of the United States was shaken. All departments immediately began to operate, especially the chief of the Washington Police Department, who was dizzy from this cauldron that fell from the sky. His phone rang immediately, and voices of blame came from the phone. All of a sudden, this person who usually held a lot of power rolled up from the bed, and quickly summoned people to blockade the whole city and search for traces. In the seaside villa, Tony was sitting on the balcony shaking red wine in his hand, with a casual posture and a calm expression. Suddenly, his brows twitched slightly, and a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "Have you finally shown up? It's a little faster than I thought." After the words fell, Tony raised his hand and drank the red wine in the glass. And in his eyes at this moment, the scene of Potts being taken away by Norris is showing. As the woman he valued the most, Tony was naturally very concerned about Potts' safety. He not only arranged for top-level bodyguards, but also secretly had shadow ninjas with him at all times. Therefore, the scene where Potts and Norris met fell into Tony's eyes at this moment through the perspective of the Shadow Corps. As long as Tony thinks, he can now let the Shadow Corps take Potts back to him through the Shadow Kingdom at any time. But Tony didn't do that. The little mouse finally showed up. If he was scared away like this, then he had to find a time to go. He didn't have time to mess around with these little mice. So, while watching Potts' safety from the perspective of the Shadow Corps, and waiting to find the opponent's lair, Tony poured himself a glass of red wine and continued to watch their performance. The vehicle drove out of Manhattan, into the Bronx, and eventually into the underground parking lot of a building. In the passenger seat, Norris took the initiative to get out of the car and opened the door for Potts, and said very gentlemanly, "Ma'am, we're here." Thank you. Nodding at him, Potts got out of the car calmly. If it weren't for 2 members of the Ten Rings gang who were always by her side to prevent her from escaping, the current scene would not look like kidnapping at all. Entering the elevator, Norris pressed the top floor. As the elevator went up, Norris, who stood in front of the elevator door, smiled and said, "My partner is not a good person. Miss Potts must be careful later. Really, I also want to see what kind of old man it is." Potts said noncommittally. Norris smiled and did not continue talking. Just a reminder, it's all out of appreciation for Potts' calmness, and he doesn't care whether Potts cares about it or not. Soon, the elevator stopped, the elevator door opened slowly, and a laboratory appeared in front of Potts. Looking around the laboratory, a woman suddenly appeared in Potts' eyes. She was wearing a white coat with experimental glasses on her face. The loose white coat could not completely conceal her perfect figure. Especially the pair of pineapples on the chest are even more eye-catching. Seeing this scene, Potts subconsciously puffed up his chest, but soon relaxed as if discouraged. Although she is not young, compared to the woman in the white coat, the gap is still visible to the naked eye. The female researcher, who didn't know that Potts had already compared her secretly, put down the experimental agent in her hand when she heard the movement, and turned her head to look at the elevator door. After seeing a few people coming out of the elevator door, her gaze was directly locked on Potts, her eyes full of scrutiny. At this time, Norris took a step forward and said with a smile, "Excuse me, where is Mr. Killian? We have brought the person he wants." Hearing this, the female researcher didn't answer directly, but just picked up a walkie-talkie on the table and said, "Killian, we're here." The words fell, and soon, a door opened on the second floor of the laboratory, and Killian walked out of it. After seeing Potts in the crowd, Killian's eyes lit up immediately, and he walked down quickly. "Potts, we meet again." Killian smiled in front of Potts and the others. Potts looked at Killian and felt familiar for a while, and soon, the dusty memory in his mind was awakened again. "It's you." Potts frowned and said that she used to work with Killian, and the relationship between the two parties was not bad. Later, Killian disappeared for unknown reasons, and he never saw him again. Unexpectedly, meeting again turned out to be in this situation. Seeing that Killian was about to continue speaking, at this moment, Norris on the side had to interrupt. "Mr. Killian, hello, our lord has already fulfilled your condition. My lord asked me to ask you, when will your promise be fulfilled?" Killian, who was interrupted, was a little dissatisfied, but he didn't say anything, just nodded and said, "Don't worry, the plan is already underway, and my promise will be fulfilled soon, don't worry. In this way, I can rest assured. If nothing happens, we will leave first. Go." Killian waved his hand. Norris didn't stay any longer, and took the elevator with 2 members of the Ten Rings gang to leave. Soon, there were only 3 Potts left in the laboratory. "Potts, come and see, this is my company, how about it? It's no different from Stark Industries, right?" Killian waved his finger to the entire laboratory, his face full of smiles. However, Potts was not interested in what he said, and continued to frown. "You have someone kidnap me, just to tell me this." Aware of Potts' unfriendly tone, the smile on Killian's face froze, and he laughed dryly and said, "Of course not. I want to say that I have my own company now, not much worse than Stark Industries. How about it? Come and help me." At this moment, Killian lost the composure he had when negotiating with cars, and his tone seemed a bit cramped instead. In the words of Tony's previous life, it is the dog-licking effect. The simple explanation is that in the face of his goddess, licking dog will be so nervous that he can't finish his sentence. Although Killian didn't act so exaggeratedly, it was similar. "Sorry, I have a job. I appreciate your kindness, but I won't work for you." Each other rejected Killian without hesitation. Immediately, Killian's expression changed. "Why? What's so good about that playboy Tony? You'd rather help him than me?" Killian exclaimed excitedly. Perhaps because of the mention of Tony, Killian unconsciously carried a touch of murderous intent in his tone. Watching his face gradually distort, the disgust in Potts' eyes became more intense. She didn't know why Killian became like this, but that didn't stop her from feeling disgusted with him. "Tony is better than you. No matter what others say, I think it's fine. If it's okay, please let me go. I still have work tomorrow." Potts said impatiently, and Killian burst into laughter immediately, and his demeanor became gloomy. Potts, you've changed. After saying something expressionless, Killian turned his head to look at the female researcher next to him, and said in a cold tone, Maya, I left her to you, inject her with the extremis virus. Hearing this, Maya immediately came up, with a cold arc on her mouth and said, it should have been like this a long time ago. What kind of a woman can a woman who can mix with that scumbag like Tony be? After finishing speaking, Maya stepped forward and wanted to grab Potts. Seeing this, Potts stepped back and subconsciously wanted to dodge. But Maya seemed to have expected her action, her expression remained unchanged, and her palm continued to grab Potts. Seeing that Potts was about to fall into her hands, at this moment, a burst of darkness appeared under Potts' feet, and 2 shadow ninjas rose from the ground immediately, blocking Potts. Clang! 2 darts were sent out from the hands of the black shadow ninja. Maya's face changed, and her figure flashed quickly, avoiding the dart attack. And Potts looked at this scene with a blank expression, completely unaware of what happened. Killian, who was walking back, also stopped at this moment, and looked at the black shadow ninja who suddenly appeared in front of Potts, frowning instantly. What? The words fell, and no one answered. Not even Potts knew about Sombra, let alone them. HMPH, pretending to be a ghost. With a cold snort in his mouth, Killian suddenly moved. His figure instantly disappeared in place, forming afterimages, and when he reappeared, he had already come in front of the black ninja, and his huge fist fell directly on the head of the black ninja. Boom! Like a watermelon bursting, the heads of the 2 shadow ninjas standing in front of Potts burst directly. Seeing this, everyone couldn't help being stunned. It appeared so weird, and this is the result. A sneer could not help but appear on Killian's face. But before his smile fully bloomed, suddenly, black shadows surged on the ground, and a black shadow ninja rose from the ground again. On the walls, on the ceiling, including around them, Killian and Maya were surrounded by black shadow ninjas in an instant. Seeing this scene, the expressions of Killian and Maya suddenly changed. The 2 looked at the black shadow ninja solemnly, and secretly became alert in their hearts. And Potts was also stunned by the scene in front of her. She could feel that these shadows seemed to be protecting her, but she had never been in contact with these things. Is it? Potts thought of Tony. It was the only reason she could think of. At this moment, a familiar voice sounded behind her. What are you thinking about, so preoccupied? Hearing this, Potts turned around instantly, and Tony's figure suddenly appeared in front of her eyes. Seeing this, Potts immediately covered his mouth with both hands, and a layer of water mist gathered in his eyes. Although she has always been very calm, it would be a lie to say that she is not afraid. Now that she has seen Tony, she finally no longer has to suppress her emotions. For a moment, thousands of grievances came to her heart. Why did you come here? Potts cried, and then plunged into Tony's arms. Putting his arms around Potts, Tony comforted softly with a soft smile on his lips. Don't worry, it's all right, don't cry anymore, if you cry again, you will become a little cat. Tony comforted Potts softly, and slapped her on the back a few times. And just when the 2 were deeply in love, a roar interrupted the warm atmosphere between the 2. Tony. Killian stared at Tony with a ferocious face and said. Especially seeing the 2 hugging together, the anger in Killian's heart continued to burn. Similarly, Maya beside Killian also had an embarrassing expression at the moment. Especially seeing Tony's tenderness towards Potts made her even more angry. Why should she be favored by you when she should be abandoned? You go to the side first and wait for me. After glancing at Killian and the 2, Tony looked down at Potts' road. Potts, who had stabilized his mood, nodded, and then obediently walked aside. At this moment, Tony turned to look at Killian and the 2, the smile on his face disappeared and was replaced by indifference. Kill them. There was no nonsense, and Tony didn't bother to talk nonsense with them, so he gave the order directly. As soon as the words fell, the black shadow ninjas surrounding the 2 moved instantly and directly attacked them. In an instant, Killian and Maya were overwhelmed by a large number of shadow ninjas. However, the strength of the 2 people injected with the extremis virus is indeed extraordinary, not only extremely fast, but also very powerful. Although there are a large number of black shadow ninjas, they can't withstand the blow of 2 people, so it took only a little effort, and the 2 solved all the black shadow ninjas. Seeing this, Tony, who had been quietly observing the two, became interested instantly. Is it the extremis virus? Interesting, I don't know if the Shadow Legion can use it. Tony was talking to himself. At this moment, a gust of wind blew towards Tony. Killian, who had dealt with the Shadow Ninja, rushed towards Tony without saying a word. His speed broke the sound barrier, sending a sonic boom through the air. Seeing that Tony was getting closer and closer, the corners of Killian's mouth suddenly turned up. He wanted this guy who was once high above him to crawl under his feet and wash away the humiliation he had brought to him. Thinking this way in his heart, his speed became faster and his strength became stronger. He seemed to have seen the scene where Tony was blown away by his punch and begged for mercy like a dead dog. And just when he fell into fantasy, bang! His fist hit something hard. The next second, Killian looked intently, and saw Tony was holding his fist in one hand, looking at him expressionlessly. Seeing this, the fantasy in Killian's heart was shattered, and a look of disbelief appeared on his face. How is this possible? How did you block my punch? Killian stared at Tony and questioned. At this moment, his emotions are a little broken. It wasn't that he was weak, but that he had worked so hard for today, and he was about to be ashamed. In the end, Tony easily blocked his attack. This is not only a humiliation to him, but also a denial of his efforts for so long. Listening to his words, the corners of Tony's mouth curled into a disdainful arc, and he commented in a casual tone, "The speed is too slow, and the strength is too weak. That's it, you still want to seek revenge on me." After finishing speaking, Tony pulled hard, and Killian's figure suddenly jumped towards him uncontrollably, and then Tony kicked him out, directly sending him flying. Boom! The figure collided with the test platform, and there was a sound of ping ping pong pong, and the things on the test platform were scattered all over the place. Cough cough. A distant cough came from Killian's mouth, and Killian said with a look of disbelief, "Impossible, how can you be so strong, it must be a fake." "Maya, kill him," Killian growled. Hearing this, Maya didn't hesitate, and rushed directly to Tony, and Killian also took the opportunity to rush up again. The two attacked at the same time, one behind the other. At this moment, Tony still stood there without moving, and there was not even a slight expression on his face. It wasn't until the attack of the two came close again that Tony said slowly, "Too slow, too weak." After the words fell, Tony threw two punches like lightning, sending Killian and the two of them flying again. Even facing Maya, he showed no mercy. Seeing the two lying on the ground for a long time, Tony shook his head slightly. Originally, he expected the two of them to give him a little surprise, but now it seems that that's it. Although the extremis virus is indeed quite strong, there is no doubt that Tony is stronger. Combining the rabbit charm and the cow charm, whether it is speed or strength, Tony completely crushes the two. As a result, the two of them looked like elementary school students in front of him, completely vulnerable. "This is impossible. It's impossible," Killian muttered to himself, with a hint of madness on his face. In order to take revenge, he spent 13 years and injected the extremis virus at no hesitation of risk. After paying such a high price, in the end, he was no match for Tony's two punches and was directly killed in seconds. How could he accept such a result? Thinking of this, his body quickly turned red, and in the next second, raging flames spewed out of his mouth. Terrifying high temperatures pervaded, and the temperature of the entire laboratory rose rapidly. Sensing the changes in the surrounding environment, Tony had a thought, and directly used the power of his mind to construct a transparent shield to cover Pot's body. Immediately, he looked at the fire dragon raging towards him. He did not dodge or dodge, and let the flames envelop him. In an instant, Tony's whole body was directly engulfed in flames. Tony, looking at this scene, Potts let out a scream, and subconsciously planned to step forward, but was stopped by the force of his mind. When Killian saw this scene, he laughed wildly. "Die, die." While speaking, he continued to spit flames in his mouth. At this moment, he seemed to turn the anger in his heart into flames, and wanted to burn Tony alive. However, he was not happy for long. Soon, he suddenly realized that something was wrong, and the flames that spewed out were no longer under his control. All the flames began to gather in a certain direction, and they gradually turned into a fireball as if they were controlled by an invisible big hand. At the same time, Tony's figure also emerged from the flames again, looking calmly at the fireball on his left hand. Integrating the dragon spell and mastering the rules of fire, the fire is like a plaything to Tony, and it can't do any harm at all. The reason why he was engulfed was just to feel the power of the flame. It has to be said that the extremis virus is indeed powerful. The temperature of the flames ejected by Killian is around degrees, which is already very close to the temperature of the surface of the sun, enough to melt most things in the world. While thinking, Tony's left hand suddenly squeezed. Immediately, the fireball gathered by the flames was extinguished directly in his palm. After doing all this, he turned his head again to look at the almost sluggish Killian and the two, and immediately moved his body and appeared in front of Killian at a speed that the two could not react. Forehead. Killian looked at Tony, who was close at hand, with a look of astonishment. Just as he was about to say something, he saw Tony's right hand caught his neck at some point and slowly lifted him from the ground. Woo! A strong sense of suffocation enveloped Killian. Like a drowning person, his hands and feet kicked in midair, and his whole body struggled violently. But under Tony's extremely powerful strength, all his struggles were in vain. Tony's right hand was like an iron clamp, firmly clamping his neck. "The farce is over, let's go here," Tony said casually, and in an instant, a ray of flame emerged from his palm, along Killian's neck, and quickly burned all over his body. Compared with Killian's flame, Tony's flame is obviously more domineering and stronger. A beast-like roar came from Killian's mouth, and his whole body was completely burned into ashes under Tony's flame, ending this sad life. Maya stared blankly at the scene in front of her. She had been in this state ever since she was blown away by Tony's punch. It wasn't until Tony dealt with Killian and set his sights on her that Maya woke up instantly. "Don't kill me, Tony, don't kill me," Maya screamed. Witnessing Killian's death, she was terrified, and the fear filled her heart, making her tremble constantly. At this moment, she didn't want revenge anymore, she just wanted to live. Looking at her, Tony didn't continue to do anything. It wasn't that he was sympathetic, but that he became interested in the extremis virus. So that's what left Maya. Although he could throw samples of the extremis virus to read for research, he didn't want to make such a trouble because he had a ready candidate. "Take me to see the extremis virus," Tony said flatly. After the words fell, Maya nodded quickly, and agreed, "Okay." After finishing speaking, the whole person hurriedly turned around and led Tony to the depths of the laboratory. The two of them appeared one after the other, and soon appeared at the door of the cold storage. As Maya entered the password, the door of the cold storage opened slowly. After the two entered the cold storage, they came to a huge freezer. This is where the extremis virus is stored. As Maya opened the freezer, a light blue liquid in an experimental agent tube appeared in front of Tony, which was the extremis virus. Looking at Tony's calm expression, Maya carefully introduced from the side. The extremis virus has a super regenerative ability, which can give people powerful strength, but the extremis virus cannot guarantee 100% successful fusion. The process of integration is full of risks, and a little negligence may result in failure of integration. Also, even if the fusion is successful, an explosion may occur due to the inability to control the power in the body. Killian and I also tried to improve before, but all ended in failure. If you want to inject the extremis virus, I can't guarantee that there will be no accidents. Apparently, Maya thought Tony was going to inject himself with extremis, but Tony wouldn't touch something like that unless he got kicked in the head by a donkey. Glancing at Maya, Tony didn't bother to explain. He directly reached out and took out an extremis virus from the freezer. Then with a thought, a black shadow troll appeared behind the two of them. Suddenly feeling the shadow from behind, Maya looked back subconsciously, and suddenly, the whole person was frightened and took several steps back. "Who?" After finishing speaking, looking at the black shadow troll in the same costume as the black shadow ninja, Maya realized this and turned to look at Tony. Sure enough, Tony didn't respond at all, which was obviously expected. "Drink it. Hand over the extremis virus to the shadow troll behind him," Tony ordered directly. After saying that, the black shadow troll didn't hesitate, took the extremis virus, and threw it into his mouth together with the experimental agent tube. The horrible chewing sound echoed in the cold storage, and there was a crunching sound from the black shadow troll's mouth. Looking at this scene, Maya was stunned, and even Tony was a little speechless. This guy is really not picky eater, he will eat anything. Soon, the extremis virus merged into the black shadow troll's body, and a trace of expectation appeared on Tony's face. The extremis virus is full of risks for human beings, but there is no risk at all for the shadow core. After all, the shadow core is an immortal existence. The only thing that makes Tony uncertain now is whether the extremis virus can have an effect on dark creatures like the shadow core. If it doesn't work, then he's working in vain. Looking at the black shadow troll with anticipation in his eyes, as time passed, the body of the black shadow troll gradually changed, and traces of fiery red lines began to emerge on his body, which was very conspicuous on his pitch-black figure. At the same time, his figure was constantly changing at this moment, and his already tall body began to rise again, growing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Soon, the height of the black shadow troll reached 5 meters, and chunks of strong muscles appeared on his body. And the fiery red lines are also covering his whole body at this moment. The black and red lines make the black shadow troll look even more mighty. If the previous black shadow troll was terrifying but not deterrent enough, now, as long as the black shadow troll stands there, it can bring a strong sense of oppression. Looking at this scene, Tony showed obvious joy on his face. He was right, the extremis virus can indeed affect the shadow core. Thinking of this, Tony immediately turned his head to look at the stunned Maya, and said, "No matter what method you use, I will see tubes of extremis virus every month." After the words fell, Maya suddenly recovered from the change of the black shadow troll. 10,000 sticks. This is too much. Maya stammered a little. You don't need to worry about it. In short, I need people to give, and I need money to give money. I have to see tubes of extremis virus every month. Tony said directly in an orderly tone, and Maya could only agree to this. Packing away the rest of the extremis virus, Tony walked out of the cold storage. When he came to Potts, Tony stretched out his hand to hold her, and said with a gentle smile, "Let's go home." Hearing this, Potts nodded, obediently followed Tony, and left Pioneer Technology. She followed Tony quietly. She didn't ask any questions. As a smart woman, she knew that if Tony wanted her to know, he would naturally say it. If he didn't say it, he just didn't want her to know. So, she seemed to have forgotten everything just now and didn't ask anything. And Tony didn't mention it tacitly. He didn't want Potts to be exposed to these things. She just needs to live like an ordinary person. To send Potts home, Tony did not stay in Potts, but returned directly to the seaside villa. The extremis virus has undoubtedly succeeded in strengthening the black shadow troll, but it still needs to be tested to what extent the black shadow troll's strength has been improved. So, Tony gave up tenderness and called Happy. When he arrived at the seaside villa, Happy had been waiting at the villa for a long time. As Tony entered, Happy got up quickly and said, "Boss." Nodding slightly, Tony said, "Come with me." After speaking, Tony turned around and walked out again. Seeing this, Happy naturally hurried to follow. When the two came to the lawn outside the villa, Tony had a thought, and the black shadow troll fused with the extremis virus suddenly appeared on the lawn. Looking at this scene, a trace of doubt flashed in Happy's eyes. "Go, fight him," Tony said. Forehead. Happy was stunned for a moment, and looked at the 5-meter-tall black shadow troll. Happy swallowed, and looked at Tony with a puzzled face, as if saying, "Boss, are you serious?" Of course, Happy naturally didn't dare to ask such a question on the bright side, so he could only smile awkwardly. "Boss, can you change someone?" "No, it's just you, don't ink." Tony gave Happy a speechless look. "He can still make you have an accident here." Seeing that Tony had made up his mind, a wry smile appeared on Happy's face, and he could only walk up to the black shadow troll. As he gradually approached, Happy gradually felt a strong sense of oppression. For a moment, his expression became solemn, and he took a deep breath. "What?" With a loud shout, Happy's figure changed rapidly, and his height reached 3 meters in a blink of an eye. Compared with ordinary people, this height is already very high, but compared to the black shadow troll who has fused with the extremis virus, Happy is like an immature teenager, more than a head shorter. Seeing that Happy was ready, Tony didn't hesitate, and directly ordered the attack. After the words fell, the black shadow troll who had been standing quietly in place moved instantly. Boom! As soon as he stepped on the ground, a huge pothole appeared on the lawn, and at the same time, his huge figure was ejected instantly. Not as cumbersome as imagined, the speed of the black shadow troll is extremely fast at this moment. Almost before Harpy could react, the black shadow troll had already appeared in front of him. The huge fist bombarded his face mercilessly. The expression on Happy's face changed drastically, but there was no time to stop it. Boom! With a loud noise, Happy was directly blasted out. Boom! His figure hit the ground heavily, creating a huge hole in the ground, and he was unable to move for a while. But the black shadow troll didn't stop. The flame pattern on his body lit up, as if he had come alive. The flames burned on his body instantly, and then directly roared towards Happy under the control of the black shadow troll. Seeing this scene, Happy's whole body exploded. Oh my god, it can even attack from a distance, making it impossible for people to live. He complained wildly in his heart, and he didn't care about the pain on his body, so he forced his body to roll on the spot, avoiding the impact of the flames. Rumble! The flames fell on the ground, and there was an explosion, and the hole that was originally 1 meter wide expanded to 3 meters. Seeing this terrifying scene, Happy, who had escaped unharmed, only felt his eyelids twitch violently. "Boss!" Happy called out to Tony. Tony turned away from him and let him continue. Seeing this, Happy was about to cry, but he had no choice but to continue fighting the black shadow troll. Of course, fighting is just a nice way of saying it. In fact, he was beaten online the whole time. The black shadow troll, which is fused with the extremis virus, is a powerful group, completely crushing him. The strength he is proud of cannot be compared with the black shadow troll. And more importantly, his speed and reaction ability couldn't keep up with the black shadow troll at all, so, apart from being beaten, he didn't even have the ability to fight back. Fortunately, his defense is good. After being beaten for so long, apart from the pain, he didn't suffer too much injury. And Tony watched the battle from the sidelines for a long time, and had a rough assessment of the black shadow troll fused with the extremis virus. Taking Harpy as an example, if the black shadow troll who has not integrated the extremis virus wants to deal with Harpy, at least 3 or more are needed. After merging with the extremis virus, 5 Harpies are not enough for the black shadow troll to fight with one hand. Compared with before, the strength of the black shadow troll has more than doubled by 10 times. And this is just a black shadow troll, when thousands of black shadow trolls fused with extremis virus appear. That scene, just thinking about it, is shocking. Just as Tony was testing the strength of the black shadow troll, the outside world has completely turned upside down at this moment. Orleans had been missing for 3 hours. Under the full pursuit of the Washongshield Police Department, he finally found a clue. The kidnappers had taken him away from Washongshield. According to the remaining traces, their destination should be Niuyo. Therefore, the calls from the upper echelons of the United States went directly to SHIELD and asked them to take over this matter. After all, New York is the headquarters of SHIELD and it is most suitable to take over this matter. Nick, who got the news, got up from the bed overnight and summoned the backbone of SHIELD to assign tasks. Soon, the whole of New York was under the surveillance of SHIELD. At the same time, outside Pioneer Technology, a row of convoys drove directly into the underground parking lot of Pioneer Technology. Kidnap the bearded Orleans, get out of the car and take the elevator to the top floor. When the elevator door opened, looking at the messy scene in the laboratory, the face of the bearded man suddenly changed, and the whole person subconsciously became alert. At this time, Maya came out of the cold storage, looking at the bearded man with a surprised expression. "Who are you?" "And Mr. Killian." The bearded man didn't answer, but asked rhetorically. Hearing this, Maya's thoughts turned quickly. She looked at the clothes on the bearded man. It was the same as Norris's before, obviously from the same organization. For these people, Killian had been in contact with them before, and Maya didn't know much about them, but she knew that now she must not let people know that Killian was gone, otherwise, her situation might be in danger. Therefore, Maya quickly suppressed the turmoil in her heart, and said calmly, "Mr. Killian has something to go out." "Where did you go?" the bearded man continued to ask, his brows furrowed quietly. "I don't know that, but you can tell me something. When he comes back, I'll tell him for you." "You? Who are you?" The bearded man looked Maya up and down, his eyes full of distrust. In this regard, Maya didn't mind, and said her name directly. Maya Hansen. After saying that, the suspicion in the bearded man's eyes dissipated a bit. Since they cooperated with Killian, it is impossible for them to know nothing about Killian. And Maya, as Killian's partner, should belong to the trustworthy range in his heart. It turned out to be Ms. Maya. I have already delivered the goods. Since Mr. Killian is not here, please accept it. Hearing this, Maya's mind moved. Although she didn't know what it was, she had to pretend it at this time. Nodding indifferently, Maya said in a calm tone, "Understood, send the goods up, and I will tell Killian." Hearing this, the bearded man stopped hesitating, picked up the walkie-talkie and said, "Bring the goods up." Yes, the person on the walkie-talkie responded, and soon there was a sound from the elevator, and the elevator door slowly opened. Two heavily armed men escorted a man in a suit and a black hood and walked in. At the same time, the voice of the bearded man also sounded at this moment, "Ms. Maya, I have delivered the person, do you want me to detain it for you? Send it to the freezer." Maya nodded, with an indifferent face the whole time. Even if she saw that the so-called goods were alone, she didn't show the slightest surprise, as if she knew about it a long time ago. Seeing this, the bearded man who had been observing her reaction finally got rid of the last trace of doubt in his heart. Since Maya knew what the goods were, it meant that she was also involved in this matter, so naturally there was no need to shy away from anything. Soon, under the leadership of Maya, two strong men sent him to the cold storage. The temperature inside was very low, but he couldn't freeze to death in a short time, so Maya directly locked the door. After the handover was completed, the bearded man did not stay any longer, but turned around and left with his subordinates. But before leaving, he still urged, "Ms. Maya, please tell Mr. Killian that we have completed all the things he ordered, and now we are waiting for his plan to start. I hope there will be no mistakes." "I see," Maya responded, and finally watched them leave in the elevator. After the elevator arrived at the first floor, Maya quickly called up the monitoring system of the underground parking lot. After seeing the bearded man and the others leave Pioneer Technology, she immediately turned and walked into the cold storage. Looking at the shivering man in the corner of the warehouse, Maya pulled off the black hood on his head without hesitation. Immediately, Orland's face appeared in Maya's eyes. In an instant, the pupils of Maya's eyes shrank instantly, and a storm surged in her heart. As the most powerful man in the United States, Orleans often appears on TV. Although Maya doesn't watch TV very much, she has seen each other. Especially after being injected with the extremis virus, her memory improved greatly, and only then did she recognize Orland's identity at a glance. Orleans, who had regained his sight, squinted his eyes to adjust to the light, and then he saw Maya clearly. He thought he was waiting for some kind of terrorist leader, but he didn't expect to see a beautiful woman when he opened his eyes, which made Orleans a little bit astonished. Just about to say something, but before he could speak, Maya suddenly stepped forward and slashed his neck with a hand knife, knocking him unconscious. After doing this, Maya left the cold storage immediately and called Tony. Beep. Accompanied by a busy tone, the phone was connected soon, and Tony's voice came from the phone. "What's up?" Hearing this, Maya said everything without any hesitation. The moment she saw Orleans, she knew that this matter was beyond her ability, and she couldn't handle it at all, so she had to leave it to Tony to handle it. In the seaside villa, after listening to Maya's narration, Tony also had a hint of surprise in his eyes. Good guy, he really underestimated Killian, he dared to do such a crazy thing. However, apart from Orleans, he was also concerned about the power that did it. Therefore, after listening to Maya's narration, Tony asked directly, "Do you know which power sent people here?" Hearing this, Maya was silent for a moment, and then said, "Killian was responsible for handling these matters before, I don't know very well. However, they all have a sign on their chests. Abstinence." Tony muttered a bit, and the words 10 Rings Gang appeared in his mind instantly. Although he was not sure if it was them, Tony was sure that those people should be members of the 10 Rings Gang. After all, there are not many organizations in the name of Ring, and even fewer have the guts to kidnap Orleans. Except for the notorious 10 Rings Gang, he couldn't think of anyone who would have the guts. Tony muttered to himself, but Maya on the other end of the phone asked anxiously, "What should we do now?" With a huge hot potato in hand, Maya really couldn't calm down. Take good care of him, and I will send someone to take him away later. Tony said calmly, his eyes full of thought. For Maya, this is a hot potato, but for Tony, this is an opportunity to control the upper class of the United States. Although his current strength is already very strong, there are no consortiums that can rival Stark Industries. Tony naturally had no idea before. After all, Stark Industries has already stood at the pinnacle. Even if he wants to go further, it is impossible. But now, someone else has given the opportunity to him, so Tony naturally won't just sit back and watch the opportunity go away. If the pinnacle of power in the United States joins forces with Stark Industries, the effect will not be as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. At that time, Tony can use this influence to bring Stark Industries to another peak. Okay, I know, Maya responded and hung up the phone. Tony, on the other hand, turned his head to look at Happy with a bruised nose and a swollen face. After hanging up the phone, you go to Pioneer Technology and bring him back. Good boss. Listening to the instructions, Happy nodded directly, then turned around and left the villa, and drove to Pioneer Technology. On the other side, S.H.I.E.L.D. finally found the location of the 10 rings after checking the surveillance throughout New York City. Although they tried their best to avoid surveillance along the way, in a big city like New York, the surveillance is too dense, and it was only because of the outstanding ability of the 10 rings that they were not discovered until now. After getting the clue, Nick didn't hesitate at all, and directly dispatched Steve and other extraordinary people. Although he can mobilize a large number of people, the rescue operation is not the more people the better. 13th Avenue, the least monitored road out of New York City. The bearded man sat in the car with his eyes closed and rested, while the others remained vigilant throughout. They are very aware of the situation they are in right now. Don't look at the current situation as calm, but they can't tell when danger will arise. What to be afraid of, what to come. Suddenly, a roar of helicopters came from the sky. In the next second, a shield flew down from the sky and smashed towards the front vehicle of the 10 Rings gang. The shield precisely hit the tires of the vehicle. Immediately, the high-speed vehicle rolled over and caused a huge explosion. Boom! The flames soared into the sky, dispelling the darkness, and the road was completely blocked by the exploded car, causing the rear convoy to stop. On the helicopter, Nick and the others were all gathered at this moment. With a sniper rifle in his hand, Barton kept scanning every car through the sniper mirror, shaking his head with a solemn expression. Mr. Orleans was not found. He was not in the car. Last time, Barton was controlled by Loki and did a lot of things for him, but after the matter was over, Loki no longer needed him, so he released the control, and he saved his life because of this. Just after he confirmed that Orleans was not in the first car, Steve shot to blow up the car and intercept the parking team, otherwise, he really didn't dare to do it. Listening to Barton's report now, the faces of everyone on the helicopter turned ugly. At the critical moment, Nick ordered, "Take them down first, remember to keep them alive." "Understand." Everyone shouted yes, and below, the members of the 10 Commandments gang who were stopped got out of the car one after another. Looking at the helicopter flying towards them in the sky, the bearded man said with a gloomy face, "Shoot it down." After the words fell, a member of the 10 Rings gang directly set up the bazooka. Accompanied by a roar, the rocket was launched with a trailing tail flame, aiming at the helicopter in the sky with precise strikes. Seeing this scene, Nick's expression changed, and he immediately yelled, "Banner!" Immediately, Banner jumped off the helicopter, his body expanded rapidly in midair, turned into a Hulk, and blocked the rocket with his body. Boom! The fireworks of the explosion appeared in the sky, but all the impact was blocked by Banner, and the helicopter behind him was not too damaged except for a shake due to the air current. Rumble! When Banner's body fell to the ground, there was a loud bang, and the whole ground shook. He is like a god coming down to earth, mighty and domineering. At the same time, the helicopter also lowered its altitude at this moment, and let down the downhill rope. Steve and others grabbed the rope and landed smoothly one by one. Attack! Seeing Banner's image, the bearded man trembled, and quickly gave the order to attack. Suddenly, a burst of intense gunshots sounded, and countless bullets roared towards Banner. The bullet landed on his skin, making a tinkling sound, unable to break through his defense at all. At the same time, Banner also roared and rushed forward at this moment. His huge stature made the ground tremble every time he fell, and soon, he rushed into the crowd and started killing. Compared with Banner, the members of the Ten Rings gang are like tiny ants at this moment, completely vulnerable. With Banner's punch down, several people were smashed into meatloaf on the spot. With such a terrifying killing method, coupled with Banner's indestructible defense, all the survivors of the Ten Rings gang collapsed immediately. At the moment, they fled in all directions one by one. Seeing this, Banner grabbed the stone from the ground and threw it towards the crowd. For a while, many people were directly smashed to pieces by Banner. In the rear, Nick and the others watched Banner's killing. Their expressions changed one after another, and they still had to use these people to find clues. If Banner killed everyone, the thread would be broken. Thinking of this, Nick immediately said anxiously, "Banner, stay alive." After the words fell, some banners above did not stop their movements, and continued to kill. Seeing this, Nick could only helplessly turn his head to look at Steve. Seeing the look in his eyes, Steve immediately understood what he meant, and immediately rushed towards Banner, punching Banner's body, knocking him back. And this sudden attack also calmed down Banner above. At this point, the killing stopped completely, but at this moment, there were not many living people left on the scene. Fortunately, Nick and the others found the bearded man who escaped by chance among the crowd. Although the bearded man looked embarrassed, he was not injured. Nick and the others saw him surrounded and looked at the bearded man. Nick said in a deep voice, "Tell me, where did you take him?" "Hey, you're not going to find him, and don't expect me to tell you." The bearded man acted very tough. Seeing this, Nick didn't bother to talk nonsense, and directly signaled to Hawkeye. Hawkeye walked up immediately with an indifferent face. As a top agent, he is not only powerful, but also proficient in various interrogation methods. Soon, a scream sounded in the dark night. 20 minutes later, Hawkeye wiped the blood off his hands and returned to the crowd. The bearded man on the ground was dead, and they also got the information they wanted. Go to Pioneer Technology," Nick said decisively, and the group returned to the helicopter again, heading towards Pioneer Technology. There was not too long a delay, and soon, a group of people descended on Pioneer Technology, entered the underground parking lot, and took the elevator directly to the top floor. When the elevator door opened, in the laboratory, Maya, who was about to leave, was completely speechless when she saw Nick and others who broke in suddenly. "These days, do you really think of this place as a vegetable market? Anyone can come here. Pioneer Technology's elevators are naturally locked, and can only be activated by swiping the card, and the building lock card that Killian gave to the Ten Rings gang has also been transferred from the bearded man to Nick and others at this moment, so they can pass unimpeded." "Who are you?" Maya asked blankly. She has said this sentence countless times tonight, so she is a little numb. "We are the official people. Now you are involved in a kidnapping case. Stay where you are," Nick said grimly. Maya didn't panic at all. "Evidence. The evidence will be there soon," Nick said meaningfully, and then waved his hand. Steve and others immediately dispersed towards the laboratory, searching for traces of Orleans. Seeing this, Maya didn't stop her, but just watched the scene quietly with her hands folded. Seeing her calm face, Nick, who was originally full of confidence, suddenly felt a thump in his heart, and a bad premonition rose in his heart. Sure enough, when Hawkeye found the cold storage according to the confession, he did not find any trace of Orleans. At the same time, Steve and the others who searched elsewhere did not find any clues at the moment. This made Nick frown instantly. Looking at the confident Maya, Nick said word by word, "Miss Maya shouldn't mind letting us check the surveillance." Random. Maya nodded indifferently. However, she was glad in her heart. When Harper took Orleans away, she deliberately deleted the monitoring. She didn't understand it before, but now she understands it all. Hawkeye looked at the monitoring screen, but only yesterday's storage screen was in the monitoring, and today's storage screen could not be seen at all. Seeing this, Nick couldn't help but said in a deep voice, "Miss Maya, what's going on?" As he said that, Nick took a step forward, exuding a sense of oppression on his body, trying to see something from Maya in this way. But after going through so many things tonight, Maya has long since calmed down. Faced with the oppressive feeling emanating from Nick, not only did she not feel any discomfort, she even wanted to laugh a little. Maybe the monitoring is broken, I don't know. By the way, do you have evidence? If not, is there a search warrant? Maya spoke one after another, gradually grasping the initiative on the field. Nick also had a headache when he heard this. Things were completely different from what he had imagined. He thought he should be sure this time, but he didn't find anything. According to Big Beard's confession, he only sent the person here for a while, and including their delay, the whole process did not exceed an hour. It stands to reason that people should be here. Thinking helplessly in his heart, Nick had to force a smile on the corner of his mouth and said, "Sorry, maybe we made a mistake." After the words fell, Maya's face turned completely cold. "Mistaken. That means there is no search warrant. You are breaking into a private house. Now, please leave, my lawyer will contact you tomorrow." After speaking, Maya made a gesture of seeing off the guests. Nick and others can only leave Pioneer Technology. At the entrance of Pioneer Technology, Nick looked back at the building behind, and said in a serious tone, "Captain, what do you think?" Hearing this, a thought flashed in Steve's eyes, either that guy lied, or he's not here at all. Or, it was the woman who realized something was wrong in advance, transferred the person, and cleared the evidence. However, I prefer the latter possibility. Just as I thought, Hawkeye, you led someone to monitor her 24 hours a day. I want to know everything about her whereabouts. It is good, Hawkeye said coldly. At the moment, except for Hawkeye, the group got in the car and left, and they had to search for other clues. At the seaside villa, Happy parked the car at the door. After the car stopped, Happy stepped out of the cab, opened the trunk, and took out a sack from inside. Watching, the sack entered the villa, and Tony, who was waiting in the living room, couldn't help but twitched his mouth when he saw this scene. Anyway, he is also a man standing at the pinnacle of power in the United States. Can't you people be more friendly to others? Thinking helplessly, Tony waved his hand immediately, let him out. Okay, boss. Happy put down the sack with a smirk, and let Orleans out. Looking at Orleans, who was in a coma, Tony picked up the red wine on the table and poured it directly on his face. Cough cough. A severe cough sounded. Happy looked at Tony in surprise. After all, he is a man standing at the pinnacle of power, so why can't his own boss show some respect to others? Tony, who had no idea what Happy was thinking, looked at the waking Orleans, with a smile on the corner of his mouth, and greeted him proactively, "Mr. Orleans, hello." You are Tony Stark," Orleans said in surprise. "You kidnapped me. Don't get me wrong, it should be said that I saved you." Tony waved his hand, he didn't take the blame. Hearing this, Orleans did not refute, and immediately showed a smile on his face and said, "Really, thank you very much, Tony, I have heard of you, a good citizen of the United States. Well, can you untie me? I'm a little uncomfortable being tied up." Orleans seemed unaware of his embarrassment, and expressed his sincere thanks. Seeing him, Tony smiled. Mr. Orleans, as expected of a politician, his acting skills are not even comparable to Oscar winners. "Tony, what do you mean?" Orleans wondered, with a very natural expression. If Tony hadn't been covering him with telekinetic power and could feel his emotional fluctuations, he would have been almost cheated. This guy was obviously full of anger in his heart, and even showed killing intent after waking up just now, but he didn't show any expression on his face, which is really admirable. "It's not interesting, but originally I wanted to have a good talk with you to see if there is any possibility of cooperation, but I don't need to talk now." Tony shook his head and said, "Would a person who wanted to kill him cooperate with him?" Tony didn't think he had such a great personality. Therefore, only unconventional means can be used. Tony said in a casual tone. Orleans, who was bound to the ground, suddenly changed his expression, and a trace of unnaturalness flashed in his eyes, but he was quickly suppressed by him. "Actor, what do you mean? Tony, I really appreciate you, there is no falsehood. Didn't you just say that you want to cooperate? For the sake of saving me, I promise you no matter what cooperation you have." Orleans said with a sincere face, no money is needed for the bad check, and he dumped a lot of it, and now he is still trying to save himself. Seeing such a scene, Tony was very emotional. These outstanding people are simply fine. If it were an ordinary person, he would have already started yelling at this moment, but he still maintained his initial attitude. Tony couldn't bear to attack him. It's a pity that this idea only lingered in Tony's mind for less than a second, before he was thrown out of his mind. Although he appreciates Orlan's reaction, he needs Orlan's unconditional cooperation to become his own person. So ignoring his words, Tony said directly into the air, Jarvis asked Rocky to come up. Okay, sir. When he got the order, Jarvis responded immediately. Soon there was a sound of footsteps at the entrance of the underground laboratory. Wearing a white coat, with a pair of gold-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose, Loki, who is full of the temperament of an elite scientist, walked out of the underground laboratory slowly. Looking at his changes, a trace of surprise flashed in Tony's eyes. Back then, fooling Loki into researching technology was just a temporary idea on his mind. Unexpectedly, now Loki seems to have gradually entered the role, like a mad scientist, staying in the underground laboratory all day long. He suspected that if he hadn't called him, this guy would have lived forever. Just when Tony was feeling emotional, Loki also came to him at this moment and said, "What's the matter?" Without any nonsense, Loki directly asked about Tony's purpose. Hearing this, Tony pointed to Orleans on the ground, raised his eyebrows and said, "Help me see if I can control this guy." After saying that, Loki glanced at Orleans expressionlessly, then nodded without hesitation. "No problem. How long do you need to control?" "Forever." "It is good." The conversation between the two was very concise, but Orleans, who was listening to the conversation between the two, changed his expression at this moment. "Hey Tony, you can't do this. Is it illegal for you to do this?" "We can discuss anything. No matter what, I can cooperate with you. There is no need for this." Orleans spoke quickly with a hint of urgency. He has remained calm until now. But it's a pity that Tony has made up his mind. His language offensive is completely useless to Tony. It can be said to be a waste of effort. Orleans knew this well, but he had no choice. After all, he had no other means other than using words to diffuse the danger. But after all, he is not the protagonist of web novels, and there is no way to resolve the crisis by talking about it. Just as he kept talking, trying to move Tony through verbal offensives, Loki, who was watching him from the side, suddenly had a gleam of light in his eyes. As the light flashed, Orleans, who was talking endlessly, suddenly closed his mouth, looking very abrupt. Immediately, Loki snapped his fingers again, and suddenly, Orleans' whole expression changed. "Owner." Orleans was expressionless, and said to Tony respectfully. Looking at this scene, a trace of surprise flashed in Tony's eyes, and then the corner of his mouth turned up into a smile and said, "Your mind control ability is getting better and better." In this regard, Loki waved his hand casually, and did not take Tony's praise to heart. "Okay, he will respect you in the future. Even if he is asked to commit suicide, he will not hesitate." "Is there anything else? My research has reached a critical moment. If there is nothing else, I will go back first." Hearing this, Tony shook his head. Loki turned around and returned to the basement again. And Happy, who witnessed the whole scene from the side, swallowed dryly, and looked at the direction Loki left with a little fear in his eyes. This ability to change a person's thinking at will is really chilling. "What's your name?" "Harvard Orleans." "How old is this year?" 58 is old. "What color do you like?" "White." Tony looked at Orleans and asked some irrelevant questions. After some tests, he was finally completely sure that Orleans in front of him had become his most loyal subordinate, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face immediately. "Happy, untie him, and take him to wash by the way." He gave instructions to Happy, who was a little dazed. Immediately, Happy recovered from the shock and nodded quickly. "Okay boss, I see." After speaking, he stepped forward to untie the rope on Orleans' body, and took him to wash and eat. Tony turned around and went to the balcony to sit down, listening to the sound of waves beating on the reef, thinking about the next arrangement for Orleans. First of all, the first point is that Orleans definitely cannot stay here. Only by returning to that position can he be valuable to Tony. Secondly, although Loki's mind control is overbearing, it may not be able to maintain the current effect forever. So there is still some monitoring that should be done, and he plans to arrange some Black Shadow ninjas to protect him personally. One is for safety, to prevent such a situation from happening again, and the other is that even if there is any change, he can still receive the news in time. The thoughts in his mind kept rolling, Tony perfected his plan, and an hour passed before he knew it. Orleans, who took a bath and ate something, became refreshed, and he was no longer in the embarrassment just now. Glancing at his condition, Tony turned his head to look at Happy beside him and said, "Send him out of here. Find a place where there is no monitoring and put him down, and you should pay attention to concealment." "Ah, good boss," Happy responded. With his limited IQ, he naturally couldn't see the intention of Tony's arrangement. But as a loyal executor, he doesn't need to understand, he just needs to follow Tony's instructions and do it meticulously. Soon, the two left the villa and got into the car. As the car started, it quickly disappeared into the darkness. Blanks Park, Happy left Orleans here without even looking at him, and quickly disappeared in place. After Orleans watched the car go away, he immediately wandered around in a place with surveillance. After doing all this, he waited quietly, he believed that someone would find him. In the SHIELD monitoring room, Nick and the others did not rest after returning to SHIELD, but continued to check the monitoring of the whole city in the monitoring room, looking for clues. However, since no relevant clues were obtained within Pioneer technology, their inquiry did not have a relevant direction at all, and it was more of an aimless search for a needle in a haystack. For a while, not only the staff of SHIELD were tired, but even Nick and others gradually became less concerned. In their view, continuing to search like this is simply a waste of time, and it is impossible to make any progress. So the only way is to continue to lock Maya and try to find some clues from her. Just when Nick was thinking about how to make Maya submit, a scream suddenly sounded in the monitoring room. A staff member of SHIELD suddenly stood up from his position, pointed at a surveillance screen in shock and shouted, "Bureau Chief! Look, is this Mr. Orleans?" After saying that, Nee suddenly stood up from his seat, and walked quickly towards the staff. When he looked at the figure in the surveillance, a cry of surprise came out of Nick's mouth. How is this possible? They spent so much manpower and material resources searching the whole city for traces of Orleans, but there was no result. Now Orleans jumped out on his own initiative, how strange things looked. But he also knew that now was not the time to worry about these things. After regaining his senses, Nick immediately ordered loudly, "Lock this position," and immediately arranged for people to pick up Mr. Orleans, quickly, quickly. Yes, everyone responded and quickly started to act. Nick even went to the scene with a large number of heavily armed members of SHIELD. 20 or 10 minutes later, more than a dozen cars stopped in front of Orleans, and a large number of people quickly got out of the cars and guarded the surroundings to prevent possible emergencies. Nick strode towards Orleans, and said respectfully, "Sir." After finishing the words, Orleans showed a friendly and polite smile on his face. "You are Nick Fury, right? Thank you for your hard work. I have to let you make a trip in person at such a late hour. It's not hard, this is what I should do. It's just, sir, I heard that you were kidnapped, can I ask how you got rid of the kidnappers?" Nick asked with a hint of doubt in his tone. It's not that he doesn't believe in Orleans' identity, but how weird this matter looks. The kidnappers paid such a high price to kidnap Orleans. Orleans should be in a cage now, and he shouldn't appear on the street alone. And when he got off the car just now, he had already observed Orleans. Although his clothes were a little messy, his face was rosy and his spirit was stable. From the beginning to the end, his face looked very calm, without the slightest sense of urgency, as if he was not worried that someone would catch him back. No matter how you look at it, it doesn't look like the reaction that a person who escaped and ascended to heaven should have. So although Orleans was successfully retrieved, Nick not only didn't feel that the matter was resolved, but even felt that the matter was getting weirder. As for this question, Orleans already had an excuse in mind, so he said his excuse without any panic. According to him, a superhero happened to meet a robber when he was fighting crime, so he happened to be saved. Under his narration, this reason seems very reasonable, and there is nothing abrupt about it. Nick nodded in agreement on the surface, but secretly still felt wrong. Unfortunately, he didn't know where this strange feeling came from, so he could only temporarily give up thinking and brought him back to SHIELD. With the successful return of Orleans, in just an hour, the news spread throughout the upper echelons of the United States. Upon receiving this news, some people in the upper echelon of the United States were happy and some were worried, because not everyone was willing to see Orleans return successfully. But no matter what they thought in their hearts, everyone on the face showed a relieved expression. Orleans didn't stay too long at S.H.I.E.L.D., and took the helicopter arranged by S.H.I.E.L.D. that night and returned to Manhattan. Although he disappeared for less than 24 hours, the impact was extremely profound, and a lot of things were waiting for him to deal with, so he didn't have time to linger too much. Time passed, and soon, the sun rose again the next day. In the morning news, Orleans stood in the studio, angrily denounced the terrorist armed forces, and expressed his determination to fight them to the end. To most, this is just a daily political show. But in a certain mysterious base, Orleans' behavior is a kind of provocation. Oh, interesting. A thin, gloomy middle-aged man with long hair watched the morning news and said hoarsely. There was a smile on the corner of his mouth, but it gave off an extraordinarily cold feeling. Just then, there was a knock on the door of the room. "Enter," the man said hoarsely. Immediately, the door was pushed open, and a burly bald man walked into the room. He had a scorpion tattooed on his shiny bald head, making him look extremely ferocious. "Sir, look for me. Go and check, I want to know why he is here." As he spoke, the long-haired man pointed to Orleans on TV. Upon seeing this, the bald man saluted immediately. "I see, my lord, I will investigate this matter clearly." After speaking, the bald man turned around and walked out of the room. Soon, as orders were issued, members of the Ten Rings gang who had sneaked into the United States took action one after another. Their method of detecting intelligence is very rough, kidnapping and threats, but it has to be said that this method is very effective. In just a few hours, they had already found out the ins and outs of the matter. After all, Maya is not the only one with such a huge pioneering technology. The guards and night staff also experienced what happened last night. Although they didn't personally participate in it, they can infer the whole thing just based on the information they saw. When the bald man got the news, he immediately fed back the news to the long-haired man. Listening to the bald man's report, the long-haired man smiled silently, his white teeth gleaming coldly under the light. Like a predator about to hunt, it showed an attacking posture. "Tony Stark, interesting. You sabotaged my good deeds again and again. I want to see how capable you are. Arrange it, I'm going to meet this rich man in Congress." As soon as he said this, the bald man's expression was shocked, and his eyes were full of surprise. How long has it been since the grown-up did it, 10 years or 20 years? Although the entire organization has been spreading rumors about the supernatural power of adults, few people have witnessed it with their own eyes. Now, does he finally have this chance? Thinking of this, the bald man excitedly licked the corner of his lips. "I'll arrange it now." Niu made an appointment with the airport, and a plane landed slowly. A group of strong men surrounded a bald man and a long-haired middle-aged man and walked slowly to the airport. Looking at this group of people, the people they met along the way subconsciously moved away, watching them leave with awe. Outside the airport, a row of luxury cars waited at the exit. After the long-haired middle-aged man got into the car started slowly and left the airport. Although the Ten Rings gang is a terrorist organization, they all have legal and reasonable identities on the surface. And the identity of their group is the senior management of a security company in the United States. In the back seat, the long-haired man was resting with his eyes closed. The bald man sat aside and flipped through the materials, while asking respectfully, "Sir, do you want to take action directly?" "Not in a hurry. First help me send a gift to Tony, and help me make an appointment with Cars, I want to meet him." "Understood." The bald man nodded, quickly took out his mobile phone and made a few calls to make arrangements. Half an hour later, a courier was delivered to Cars's official residence, which indicated that Cars should sign for it in person, so the nanny who opened the door could only turn around and look for Cars, who had a rare day off. Soon, Cars' figure appeared at the door, looking at the courier, his eyes were full of doubts. "Who asked you to bring it?" The courier listened to his words with a cautious expression on his face. After all, this person in front of him is one of the few people who stand at the pinnacle of power in the United States. "Mr. Cars, I don't know who sent it, but I just specified that you must sign for it yourself." Hearing this, Cars frowned, but he didn't embarrass him, and nodded directly to sign the courier. He is not afraid of danger. After all, the things that can enter here must have been checked repeatedly. If there were really any explosives or dangerous items in the courier would never be able to get here. After dismissing the courier, Cars returned to the study with the courier. When he opened the package, there was a disc inside, but nothing else. Looking at the CD in his hand, Cars didn't hesitate, and directly stuffed it into the VCD and played it. Soon, as the screen flickered, his figure appeared on the screen. Seeing this scene, Cars's expression changed suddenly, and he stood up from his seat at once. The contents of the CD were nothing but all the contents of his previous conversation with Killian. There is only him in the picture, and the shooting angle is the direction where Killian was sitting at that time. Seeing this, he couldn't figure out where the disc came from. Squid. Curses came out of Killian's mouth continuously, and Cars' blood pressure surged with anger. But he didn't turn off the screen, but continued to watch. Sure enough, after his conversation with Killian ended, the screen flickered and became pitch black, and then a synthetic voice came from the TV. Mr. Carls, good afternoon. I have reserved a seat in the private club, at 7 o'clock tonight. I look forward to your visit. After finishing speaking, a line of address appeared on the screen, and all the contents of the CD ended here. Looking at the completely dark TV screen, Cars fell into deep thought with a gloomy expression on his face. He didn't expect that he hunted geese all day long, but in the end he was blinded by the geese. Although the voice in the video did not issue any threats or warnings, the content played earlier was the most powerful threat. He knew that if he couldn't keep the appointment on time, the previous content might appear in front of everyone tomorrow. At that time, the sins committed with him will definitely not have any good fruit to eat. After all, he betrayed Orleans, which is no different from betraying the country. So no matter how angry he was, when the time came to 6 o'clock in the evening, he still left the house and went to the appointment. At the same time, in the Stark Industrial Building, a courier was sent to the front desk of the Stark Industrial Building by a tightly packed courier. At this time, because it is the rush hour, there are a lot of people at the front desk. When the time came, a terrifying explosion sounded suddenly, and the front desk of the Stark Industrial Building directly turned into a sea of flames. Dozens of people died on the spot, and dozens of others were injured. For a moment, the whole scene became noisy and lively. Thank Club, the top private club in New York City, is exclusively for the rich. When Cars came here along the address, a strong man locked his eyes directly on him, and then quickly walked up to him. Mr. Cars, my lord has been waiting for a long time, please follow me. The strong man spoke forcefully, without much respect in his words, but Cars didn't bother to care about it, and followed him into the clubhouse without saying a word. Passing through the corridors, the two entered the depths of the clubhouse, and soon stopped in front of a box. The strong man stretched out his hand and made a gesture of invitation. Cars pushed the door open and walked in without hesitation. Not to mention the luxury in the box, Cars' attention was directly on the two people in the box. A long-haired man sat in the middle, and a bald man stood aside. Glancing at the bald man, Cars' eyes all fell on the long-haired man, and he knew that the man in front of him was the right one. Is that you asking me to meet? Now that I'm here, can you tell me about your identity? Without hesitation, he sat opposite the long-haired man and spoke calmly. As if this place was like his home field, without showing any cowardice. Hearing what Cars said, the long-haired man smiled, and then a hoarse voice sounded in the box. You call me Mandarin, but I prefer you to call me Mandarin. As soon as these words came out, Cars, who was maintaining his composure, instantly changed his expression. He thought that the identity of the person who came here might not be simple, but he didn't expect that the person who came here turned out to be Mandarin. Most people may not have much feeling for this name, but for Western countries, this name is their deepest nightmare. From the beginning of the 19th century, this name began to appear in the West, when many people died because of him. For this reason, the Western countries joined forces to destroy him, but this man showed divine power, not only destroying the coalition forces of various countries, but even causing great losses to all countries, and once became a nightmare for many Western countries. Until the late 20th century, the name Mandarin gradually fell silent, and even no longer appeared in the ears of the world. But the Ten Rings gang he founded has become the largest terrorist armed organization in the world. These are what Cars learned from the top secret files of the United States. For a moment, He looked at the Mandarin in front of him, and his mentality gradually became unstable. Looking at the Mandarin with a slightly changed expression, Kars's eyes instantly became dignified. Kars showed enough attention to this famous Oriental devil. However, he did not respectfully call him Mandarin, but still called him Mandarin. Not only for face, but also for the next negotiation. Negotiations are all about aura. Calling him Mandarin now means that Kars is inherently shorter than him, so he naturally doesn't want to. It turned out to be Mr. Mandarin. I don't know why you invited me here today. Hearing this, Mandarin raised his brows lightly, without bothering about the title, and directly got to the point. I heard that Mr. Orleans is resolutely implementing the anti-terrorism policy recently. There was a little accident last time, so I plan to invite him to be a guest again, hoping that Mr. Kars can provide us with enough information. After the words fell, Kars' expression suddenly changed, and a burst of anger rose on his face. I've already helped you last time, but you have a problem yourself, and now you want me to help. It's impossible. Looking at the excited Kars, Mandarin smiled nonchalantly. Mr. Kars, I didn't invite you here to discuss with you, but to inform you. You know, if you do something once, there will be a second time. You have no choice. While I'm in a good mood now, you can make a small condition, otherwise, I don't guarantee that what you see today will appear in the White House tomorrow. You threaten me. Kars stood up angrily. No, it's not a threat, it's just a reminder of an established fact. Mandarin said calmly. Aren't you afraid that I will be caught dead? There was a hint of madness in Kars' eyes, as if he might make an extreme choice at any time. Mandarin looked at this scene, and was not moved by it at all, and even let out a chuckle. If you don't cooperate, the fish will definitely die, but I don't know if the net will break. Mandarin shrugged indifferently. Seeing his appearance, Carlston, who originally wanted to pretend to be crazy, sat down with a slumped face. He wanted to make Mandarin feel apprehensive, but Mandarin's words directly broke through his psychological defenses. They don't have no choice like him. For Mandarin and others, this is just an action. It's best to succeed. If you don't succeed, you will give up. There is no impact at all. Unlike him, there is no way out except one way to the dark. At this moment, he regretted that he had promised Killian before, and was even photographed as evidence. It's a pity that it's too late to regret it now. He has no turning back or other options at all. I promise you. However, you have to help me get to that position. Kars gritted his teeth and chose to join forces again. Hearing this, Mandarin smiled. No problem, it will be more helpful to me if you sit in that position. The two formally reached a cooperation, and Kars didn't stay much longer and left the clubhouse soon. After Kars disappeared, the bald man who had been standing aside without speaking said in a low voice, My lord, do you want to send someone to watch him? No, he's a smart guy and knows what to do. Mandarin waved his hand, rejecting the bald man's proposal. Come on, it's time for us to meet that former partner. Hearing this, the bald man couldn't help being taken aback, and then reminded him in a low voice. My lord, Killian is dead. Quote, so what he promised me has not been fulfilled, no one can ask me to help with things for nothing. Quote. When she said this, Madeline's tone showed a trace of coldness, which caused the bald man beside him to shudder, and dared not speak any more. The two left the clubhouse, got into the car, headed towards Pioneer Technology, and quickly disappeared into the crowd. On the other side, in the seaside villa, Tony also received news that Stark Industries had been bombed. When Tony got the news, he was stunned for a moment, and when he realized it, a cold murderous intent flashed in his eyes. Interesting. Have you found out who did it? Tony looked at Happy, who was reporting, and asked. Harpy, the head of the security department, broke out in a cold sweat when he heard this. Sorry boss, the guy who sent the bomb to the company covered his face, we didn't find out his identity information. I also investigated the courier company. There was no delivery to our company today. That guy should have pretended to be the courier company. After finishing the words, Tony gave Happy a cold look, and his calm eyes made Happy's heart tremble for a while. You go to guard the gate of the company tomorrow, you don't have to follow me. Hearing this, Happy's figure trembled slightly, and his face quickly turned pale. He opened his mouth, trying to defend himself, but in the end he couldn't say a word. No matter what the reason is, as the head of the security department of Stark Industries, it is his responsibility to protect the company's security. Now that something like this happened, he naturally had to take full responsibility. And he believed that if he opened his mouth to justify, the punishment would not be lessened, but would be more severe. Therefore, Happy finally lowered his head bitterly and said in a low voice, "I understand, boss." After speaking, Happy turned and left the villa. After watching him leave, Tony rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly. To him, this incident was just a trivial matter, and he didn't care about how many people were killed or injured. What really made him angry was Happy's slackness. It was unforgivable to let a stranger step into the company without any precautions. Of course, Tony didn't completely abandon him, this punishment was just to beat him up. Shaking his head and not thinking about it anymore, Tony took out his mobile phone and dialed a number that he hadn't contacted for a long time. "Hey, Tony, it's me. Is there a problem? Help me find out who did the bombing that happened in my company." "It is good." Facing Tony's order, the person on the other end of the phone agreed without hesitation. It was Jin Bin, who hadn't contacted him for a long time. If you ask the organization with the most outstanding intelligence in the United States, most people will definitely think of the FBI first. But if you ask Niayu about the organization with the most outstanding intelligence, it must be Jin Bing, the underground emperor. Once upon a time, there was a saying in the underground world of New York, if you want to kill someone and go to Jin Bin, he will help you solve it perfectly. If you want to find someone, go to Jin Bin, he will tell you where the person is in the first time. Chapter 91. Pioneering Technology. Since Killian mysteriously disappeared, Maya gradually took control of the pioneering technology with the help of Tony. Although he does not have the absolute right to speak in the company like Tony, he has become the bright leader of Pioneer Technology. When Mandarin and his group arrived at Pioneer Technology, they directly visited Maya as a senior executive of the security company. Hearing the call from the front desk, although Maya wondered what the senior management of the security company wanted her to do, she still received Mandarin and his party in the reception room. Pushing open the door and entering the reception room, Maya's eyes fell directly on the two of Mandarin. Compared with other images of a female scientist in the past, she is now wearing a black professional skirt, black stockings on her feet, and black high heels. She exudes the aura of an elite and strong woman in the workplace. Looking at the two Mandarins, Maya frowned instantly. These two people didn't look like high-level executives of the security company, and both of them exuded a dangerous atmosphere. For a while, Maya couldn't help but become vigilant. "What do you two want me to do?" Maya asked while sitting opposite the two. "Although I feel that the two Mandarins are not good people, but in broad daylight, they shouldn't dare to do anything, right? Are you Maya Hansen?" Mandarin's hoarse voice sounded, with a dangerous smile on the corner of his mouth. Maya nodded, a little puzzled. And Mandarin, who had confirmed his identity, exuded a terrifying aura at this moment, and said word by word, "I am Killian's partner, and he promised to provide me with a batch of extremis virus. Now that he's dead, Miss Maya won't deny it, right?" As soon as these words came out, Maya's pupils suddenly shrank. The extremis virus is a secret of Pioneer Technology. Except for him and Killian, even the rest of the company's top executives don't know about it. But now, a stranger broke the secret of Pioneer Technology in one go. This moment made Maya's heart tremble. "Who are you? How do you know extremis virus?" "You can call me Mandarin, I just want to know when will my extremis virus be handed over to me." Madeline spoke calmly. Maya immediately shook her head and refused. "I'm sorry, I don't know you guys. Since it's what Killian agreed to give you, then you can go find him. I still have something to do." After speaking, Maya got up and wanted to leave. Suddenly, Mandarin's cold laughter came from behind. "It seems that Miss Maya is not going to fulfill her promise. In that case, don't blame me for being rude." After speaking, Mandarin suddenly raised the middle finger of his right hand, and a gust of wind blew through the meeting room immediately, blowing Maya away. Boom! The figure hit the wall heavily, and Maya was dizzy all over. "You!" Looking up at Mandolin viciously, Maya was about to fight back when suddenly Mandolin put down her right hand and raised her left hand, pointing her little finger directly at Maya. Suddenly, a chill hit Maya's heart, and a freezing beam instantly fell on her body, gradually freezing her body. Realizing this scene, Maya's expression changed dramatically. She struggled hard, trying to break free from the shackles of the ice, but in the end it was of no avail. She could only watch herself become an ice sculpture. "Take her and let's go," Mandarin said casually. The bald man was a little puzzled. "My lord, why do you want to keep this woman? She can make extremis virus, can you?" Hearing this, the bald man immediately understood, shut his mouth wisely, and then stepped forward to pick up the human-shaped ice cube, and walked out of the meeting room with Mandarin behind him. And when people from Pioneer Technology saw Maya frozen into ice, everyone's expressions changed instantly. Many people came up to stop them, but they were directly killed by the Mandarin urging the Lord of the Rings. As a world-renowned terrorist, human life is not worth mentioning in his eyes, so he has no intention of showing mercy. As for things getting worse, he is even less afraid. Where is it now? What he has to do in the future is bigger than today. In the end, the two broke out from Pioneer Technology, turned Pioneer Technology upside down, and left. 10 minutes later, a large number of sirens sounded under the Pioneer Technology building. After listening to the personnel from Pioneer Technology, the police station in Niue City suddenly realized that it was beyond their control to intervene in this matter, so they directly transferred the case to S.H.I.E.L.D. Not long after getting the news, Nick arrived with the people from S.H.I.E.L.D. Originally, this trivial matter was not worth dispatching by the chief of the bureau, but the New York Police Department passed the surveillance video in Pioneer Technology to S.H.I.E.L.D., allowing S.H.I.E.L.D. to figure out the identity of Mandarin in the first place. Hence the scene where Nick himself arrives at the scene. "Have you found out what's going on?" In the reception room, Nick looked at the traces of the scene and asked the investigators of S.H.I.E.L.D. After the words fell, the investigators directly played a surveillance video on the computer. "Director, I think you should listen to this content." Hearing this, Nick's attention was immediately focused on the video. It's exactly what Mandarin asked Maya for the extremis virus. Listening to the conversation between the two parties, Nick's face gradually became serious. Combined with the previous kidnapping incident in Orleans, the information in his mind was quickly connected, and he immediately realized the amazing truth of the matter. Mandarin was actually involved in the previous kidnapping incident. Thinking of this, Nick suddenly realized that something was wrong. The Mandarin sent people to kidnap Orleans before, so will the old drama repeat itself this time? With this idea in his mind, Nick immediately lost the idea of continuing the investigation, and quickly called the members of S.H.I.E.L.D. to retreat. He must protect Orleans quickly now, absolutely not allowing what happened last time to happen again. At the same time, at the seaside villa, Tony, who had been waiting for more than an hour, finally received the information from Jin Bing. As the underground emperor of Niue City, I have to say that Jin Bing's efficiency is high. In just 1 hour, he not only found out the Stark Industries bombing case, but also figured out the mastermind behind it, Mandarin. Of course, this is also because Mandarin did not hide his identity at all. Otherwise, if he really wanted to hide it, then Jin would not have found out his existence so quickly. After reading the information sent in the mailbox, Tony's eyes suddenly became deep. If Tony still lacks understanding of other characters, then Tony has a very deep memory of the Mandarin, Iron Man's old enemy. After all, the first time he was kidnapped was the work of the 10 Rings, and it was hard for Tony to remember. After closing the mailbox, Tony's thoughts turned quickly. Whether it is a superhero or a villain in Marvel, they all have their own pursuits. For example, Norman, such as Dr. Octopus, one wants to grow his own company, and the other wants to continue researching his own technology. Although acting crazy, they are all related to their own interests. Only Mandarin is purely a complete lunatic. Because of what happened in the past, he has always been obsessed with destroying human civilization, and his behavior can be described as very crazy. But precisely because of his purpose, Tony can almost predict his next action plan, which should be to continue the unfinished plan before, kidnap Orleans, or kill him. Because he wants to achieve his goals, the US government has always been a huge stumbling block. As the head of the United States, whether it is kidnapping Orleans or directly killing him, it will have a huge impact on the United States and help him clear the obstacles on the way forward. Therefore, Tony was not in a hurry. He placed the Shadow Legion next to Orleans. If something happened to Orleans, he would be able to find him. If that was the case, why bother to investigate? After clearing his mind, Tony relaxed again. Through the balcony, looking at the surging waves in the darkness, he murmured to himself, "Old enemy, I want to see if you are qualified to be my old enemy." After speaking, Tony fell into complete silence. On the other side, Nick, who returned to S.H.I.E.L.D., summoned Steve and others immediately and sent them to Washington S.H.I.E.L.D. to protect Orleans. And he presided over the overall situation in New York City, continuing to search for traces of the Mandarin. After receiving the order, Steve and the others immediately went to Washington S.H.I.E.L.D. to protect Orleans. Cooperating with the doubled bodyguard team around Orleans, he completely built a solid wall around him. The White House. After a day's work, Orleans rubbed the bridge of his nose and walked out of the White House under the guard of bodyguards. With the lessons of the last time, Orleans' recent home route is different every day. Even Orleans himself didn't know which route to take home. Everything was temporarily planned by the top security experts around him, which greatly improved safety. But just as he walked out of the White House, a call came from behind him. Cars quickly caught up with Orleans and said with a smile on his face, "Your Excellency Orleans, wait." After the words fell, Orleans stopped, looked at Cars behind him and smiled. "What's the matter, Cars?" "That's it. I still have some questions about today's topic. I want to continue discussing with you. If you don't mind, how about I give you a ride?" Cars said it very naturally, and Orleans and the others didn't suspect anything. In today's parliament, Cars did disagree with Orleans. Now that he wants to talk to him more, Orleans will naturally not refuse. "Of course, no problem. Get in the car, let's talk in the car." "It is good." After speaking, Cars was added to Orleans' team. In a building 1 kilometer away from here, a group of heavily armed soldiers were waiting quietly. Mandarin looked down at the night outside the window, shaking the red wine glass in his hand. The bald man followed him as usual. Not far away, a slender man was sitting in front of the computer and fiddled with something. He is Norris, who took Potts away before. As I said before, Mandarin's apparent identity in the United States is a senior executive of a security company, and Norris is the apparent president of the security company. Suddenly, a beeping sound came from the computer, and Norris, who had been fiddling with the computer, suddenly showed a smile on his face. "The fish is hooked, my lord." After saying that, Mandarin, who was looking at the scenery outside the window, suddenly turned around with a smile on his lips. "It seems that our partners are more concerned than we thought, and they started to act so soon." "Then shall we start to act, my lord?" Norris asked respectfully. Mandarin nodded. "Let's take action, a quick decision." "Yes." Norris nodded, immediately picked up the phone and began to give orders, and Mandarin also turned to look at the bald man at the moment and said calmly, "Scorpion, you can go together." "Okay, my lord." The bald man called Scorpion nodded respectfully, and then a ferocious smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. On the highway, 5 armored vehicles formed a convoy and drove forward. In the third vehicle, Orleans and Cars sat in the back seat and kept talking and exchanging ideas with each other. Looking at Cars' serious face, anyone could see that he was here to discuss work. Suddenly, a roar came from behind the convoy. Under the cover of the night, the roar was extremely harsh. Suddenly, the bodyguard team around Orleans heard a calm voice in the headset. "There is a situation, pay attention to protect Mr. Orleans." Clear. Soon, Harleys appeared behind the convoy. A strong man driving a motorcycle appeared behind the convoy, biting them like a hungry wolf. "Head, what should we do now? Do you want to fight back?" In the headset, a team member asked. Hearing this, the captain of the bodyguard team said calmly as usual, "No, speed up and get rid of them." Yes. At the moment, the team's speed increased rapidly, and the Harley that appeared behind them quickly began to distance themselves. However, before they could completely get rid of the crowd behind them, suddenly, a bright headlight appeared on the road in front of the convoy. A heavy truck blocked the convoy's way. On the top of the front of the car, a bald man looked at the oncoming convoy with a grinning face, and a heavily armed soldier stood on both sides of the giant truck, completely blocking the way forward. "No, Captain, we've been made dumplings," someone in the bodyguard team exclaimed, and the captain of the bodyguard's face sank when he saw this, ready to fight. After saying that, the captain of the bodyguard who was driving turned his head to look at Orleans and cars in the back seat and said, "Gentlemen, we have encountered a little trouble. No matter what happens later, don't get out of the car. I will solve everything." Hearing this, the two of Orleans stopped talking. "We know, Mike, be careful," Orleans ordered. Hearing this, Mike showed a confident smile on his face. "Mr. Orleans, don't worry, I am the best fighter, and I will definitely take you out of here safely." While speaking, the convoy had already stopped in the middle of the road. At this moment, many bodyguards in the car also got out of the car and quickly built a line of defense, ready to fight. In the last car, Steve and Banner shook their heads, opened the door and got out of the car. At the front of the convoy, Saul twisted the hammer and got out of the car without saying a word. The chilling atmosphere permeated the road, and the constant roar from behind the convoy was like drums beating on the battlefield, stirring everyone's emotions. The Scorpion standing on the top of the heavy truck looked at the convoy building up the defense line, licked its tongue bloodthirstily, and immediately ordered, "Attack." When the words fell, the members of the 10 Rings gang who had already prepared did not hesitate, and a row of people in the front row carrying the bazooka immediately pressed the launch button. Boom! There was an explosion-like roar, and a row of rockets headed straight for the convoy with their tail flames. Seeing this scene, the faces of the bodyguards who got out of the car to build defenses changed, but none of them panicked. One by one quickly hid behind the vehicle. With the previous lessons learned, this time, the Orleans team has been refitted and upgraded. It can not only defend against bullets, but also against strong explosions such as rockets. As long as they are not hit directly, there will be no danger. But when everyone was thinking about avoiding this wave of attacks, Soul's thoughts in the crowd were obviously different from everyone else's. Looking at the roaring rockets, not only did he have no intention of dodging, he even raised the hammer in his hand. As divine power poured into it, streaks of thunder flashed on the hammer. In the next second, a terrifying thunder roared out, crashing heavily into the rocket in midair, detonating the rocket in advance. Boom! With a loud noise, terrifying fireworks appeared in midair. Everyone looked at this scene in astonishment, and looked at Saul for a while full of surprise and astonishment. Surprised that there is such a strong person hidden on my side, and stunned, there is actually such a person with mysterious power in the world. On the heavy truck, Scorpion, who was planning to enjoy the explosion, watched this scene. The smile on the corner of his mouth suddenly froze, and he frowned directly. "It's really unexpected that there are extraordinary people," Scorpion said blankly. As the world's largest terrorist organization, he was no stranger to extraordinary people. It's just that because the number of extraordinary people is very rare, almost no one will use extraordinary people as bodyguards, so he was so shocked when he saw Saul show his strength. But soon, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth again, and Scorpion snapped his fingers. Swish! In an instant, 3 figures appeared behind him in an instant, each of them exuded a cold aura, with expressionless faces. "Go, deal with him." Scorpion pointed at Soldau. The 3 of them didn't respond, they just disappeared in place in an instant. In order to cooperate with Mandarin before, Killian specially provided him with a batch of extremis virus, and promised to continue to provide it in the future. It is precisely because of this that the two sides have the opportunity to cooperate. In the first batch of extremis virus, there were 10 injections in total, 6 of them failed after injection, and only 4 succeeded. Now these 3 are 3 of the 4 successful. As for the last one, it is the Scorpion standing on top of the heavy truck. On the opposite side, Saul, who had destroyed the rocket, was about to rush into the crowd and start a killing spree, but before he could make a move, he found 3 guys with a cold aura rushing towards him. Seeing this, Saul's expression instantly became serious, his eyes full of seriousness. After beating again and again, he had completely adjusted his mentality at this moment, and he didn't dare to underestimate anyone anymore. Therefore, before the 3 of them approached, Saul directly waved Thor's hammer in his hand. Boom! 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 A bolt of lightning struck the 3 of them directly, and a terrifying thunder appeared in the air. But in the next second, something that stunned him happened. Those 3 guys actually dodged his attack. How can that be? The speed of lightning is second only to light. How could they escape? Surprised to see the 3 people dodging the thunder, Saul didn't react for a while. When he came back to his senses, the three of them had rushed in front of him and launched an attack at the same time. Puff! There was a sound of piercing through the air, and the three of them launched an offensive at the same time, bombarding his head, throat, and chest, three vital places. Thor swung Thor's hammer to fight back, and his figure quickly dodged, but the speed of the three of them far exceeded his expectations. Even with his reaction speed, he could barely react. In the end, he blocked the blow to the head with Thor's hammer, and narrowly avoided the ultimate attack that hit the throat. But in the end, he was punched in the chest by the last person. Boom! A dull voice echoed in the air. Sol's figure immediately flew upside down, a mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth, making his face turn pale. Behind the convoy, Steve and Banner, who got out of the car, happened to see this scene. Their expressions changed at the same time. Without hesitation, they rushed to the battlefield quickly. Roar! A roar sounded, and Banner's figure changed rapidly, turning into a Hulk again in an instant. Immediately, with a sudden jump under his feet, he stepped on the ground into a huge crater, ejected his figure, and directly knocked one of the three into the air. Steve was not idle either, and he threw the shield in his hand as a hidden weapon, directly spanned a distance of hundreds of meters, and knocked away the Transcendent who was about to chase Thor. As the two joined the battlefield, the battle situation changed again, 3 against 3, extraordinary versus extraordinary. Even in order to prevent the confrontation between them from affecting the convoy, the three of them took the initiative to lead the 3 extraordinary members of the 10 Rings away from the convoy, and opened up another battlefield in the wilderness beside them. On the heavy truck, Scorpion looked at this scene, only glanced at it, then withdrew his gaze, and once again focused on the convoy. His goal was Orleans, and nothing else mattered. Kill. Cold words sounded in his mouth. Members of the 10 Rings go on the offensive again. In the convoy, many bodyguard members also quickly began to meet the enemy under the command of the bodyguard Captain Mike. All of a sudden, intense gunshots rang out on the road, mixed with bursts of explosions. The rockets seemed to be free of money, and they were continuously fired from the 10 Rings gang, bombing towards the vehicle. The defense of the upgraded vehicles is also terrifying. After resisting so many bombings, except for the first vehicle that was completely scrapped, the rest of the vehicles are still intact. Almost like a turtle shell. Faced with this stalemate, Scorpion, who had been watching the show, finally couldn't help but make a move. Compared with extraordinary people, ordinary people are like ants on the ground, without much resistance at all. Even though each of these bodyguards is a world-class expert, there is still an insurmountable gap with the strengthened Transcendent. In particular, what the Scorpion injects is the Extremis virus, which is not only extremely fast, but also has an extremely powerful regenerative ability. Even if you are hit by a bullet, you can quickly recover from your injuries. Therefore, with the cooperation of other members of the 10 Rings gang, Mike and the others' resistance was quickly defeated. Seeing that the Scorpion was about to approach the convoy on another battlefield, Steve and the others became anxious. Their task is to protect Orleans. If something happens to Orleans, even if they keep all 3 extraordinary people, it will still be an irreparable sin. Immediately, all 3 wanted to get rid of their opponents and return to the team. But as soon as they revealed this intention, the 3 Chalfon who were fighting with them seemed to be crazy, and rushed forward without hesitation, and they did not hesitate to trade injuries for injuries, holding them back tightly. In addition, these 3 guys are fused with the Extremis virus, each of which has a super regenerative ability, and for a while, it is like brown sugar, sticking to them tightly. Seeing this, the 3 of Steve were also anxious, and immediately let out a low shout from Steve's mouth. A trace of black suddenly appeared on him, and Steve's speed and strength instantly increased a lot. The opponent who was originally evenly matched with him was directly blasted away by him. Banner roared like a wild beast at this moment, and his muscles swelled instantly. He punched his opponent with a punch. Boom! Immediately, Banner's opponent was punched with a big hole in his stomach. Seeing the 2 broke out one after another, Saul also became anxious. He is a majestic god of war, so he doesn't want to lose face. Thunder! With a loud shout, Thor's hammer in Thor's hand released thunder and lightning crazily, and the terrifying thunder light instantly enveloped Thor's opponent, and thousands of thunderbolts fell down, directly drowning his opponent. But an accident also happened at this time, perhaps because he hit too hard. Sol's opponent suddenly exploded. Boom! Terrifying flames emerged, engulfing Saul directly, and a piercing scream sounded immediately. Seeing this, Steve's expressions changed. Saul. The two called out from their mouths, and the remaining two supernatural members of the Ten Rings gang looked at each other at this moment, and then rushed towards them quickly. Their bodies swelled rapidly, causing Banner's expression to change drastically when he saw this scene. Captain, withdraw. When the roar sounded, Banner immediately wanted to retreat, but it was too late. The bodies of the two exploded completely, and the terrifying flames directly engulfed the two of Banner. As dead warriors trained by Mandarin, completing missions is their only goal. As long as they can achieve their goals, even if they sacrifice their own lives, the two will not hesitate. So, after realizing that they couldn't stop Steve and the others, the two directly chose to blow themselves up. The terrifying explosion swept across the air, instantly adding fire to Chalfon, who had self-destructed before. For a moment, in the night, the sky was directly reflected in fiery red, dazzling and beautiful, but also full of murderous intent. Hearing the movement behind him, Scorpion looked back, with a gloomy look in his eyes. The 3 Chalfon who had been injected with the extremis virus died. This is also a huge loss for the Ten Rings gang, enough to hurt. Apart from the Mandarin, only the 4 of them from the Ten Rings gang successfully integrated the extremis virus, and their evolution was extraordinary. Now that he has lost 3 in one go, even if he completes the task this time, he will probably be punished if he goes back. Therefore, Scorpion is naturally not in a good mood. Fortunately, he knew that the business was important, so he looked away after just one glance, and came outside the 3rd car. Just standing still, there was a burst of gunshots in the driver's seat. Bang bang bang. Mike held the Desert Eagle in his hand, and all the bullets poured into Scorpion's chest at this moment. Looking down at the blood hole in his chest, Scorpion frowned and exerted a little force. Immediately, the bullet was directly squeezed out of his muscles, and his wound began to heal quickly. After all this was done, Scorpion looked up at Mike, who was in despair in the driver's seat, and suddenly stretched out his right hand, grabbed Mike by the neck, and dragged him out of the driver's seat. I hate when people sneak up on me. After finishing speaking, Scorpion broke Mike's neck with one hand. At this point, Orland's bodyguard team was completely wiped out. In the back seat, Cars watched this scene and swallowed subconsciously. Although he cooperated with the Ten Rings gang, he didn't dare to speak at this time. If the Ten Rings gang went crazy and killed him directly, wouldn't he have nowhere to cry? He didn't want to bet on whether they would care about his status as a partner, so at the moment, he behaved very well and didn't even dare to move. After cooking Mike, Scorpion looked at Orleans and Cars in the back seat with a smile on his face. First, he glanced at the expressionless Orleans to confirm his identity, then Scorpion turned his attention to Cars and said with a smile on his face, "Mr. Cars, don't be so nervous. You are our great hero, I will not shoot you." As soon as he said this, Orleans immediately turned his head to look at Cars beside him, and the image of Cars calling him to stop flashed through his mind quickly. Combined with the current scene, he didn't know that he was betrayed. Suddenly, a flash of anger flashed in Orleans' eyes, wishing he could kill Cars on the spot. And Cars didn't look at Orleans at the moment, but just looked at Scorpion and smiled awkwardly. "It's all thanks to you, I just provided a little help." On the surface, he looked humble, but in fact, Cars was already cursing in his heart at this moment. Scorpion didn't reveal it sooner or later, but at this time to reveal his behavior, it was simply uneasy and kind. Scorpion naturally heard the reluctance in his words, and a trace of contempt flashed in his eyes. Just now Cars looked nervous, although he was frightened by himself, but in his opinion, it may be that there is no deliberate element in it, and I don't want to expose what I have done. In this way, if there are any accidents again, such as the last scene where Orleans returned safely, then he can pretend that he doesn't know anything. This kind of behavior of jumping left and right is not tolerated by Scorpions. So this is what I just said. Ignoring Cars with an ugly face, Scorpion looked at Orleans, whose anger had not dissipated, with a playful expression. "Mr. Orleans, isn't he determined to fight terrorism? I'm here now, I don't know what you plan to do." Said in a joking tone, he enjoyed the feeling of trampling these big men under his feet. Hearing this, Orleans snorted coldly, "It's nothing more than rats in the sewer. As long as I'm still alive, I will resolutely wipe out you rats. His tone was very firm, and there was not much panic. Scorpion couldn't help laughing after hearing it. Tough enough, but I don't know if you are also tough in the face of death. With previous lessons learned, Mandarin no longer pursues direct kidnapping, so before setting off, he specially told Scorpion that it doesn't matter whether he lives or dies. Therefore, when he heard what Orleans said, he was directly moved to kill. With murderous intent in his eyes, Scorpion stretched out his right hand instantly and grabbed Orleans' neck without the slightest hesitation. Judging by his appearance, he didn't intend to keep his hand at all. Once he caught it, Orleans would undoubtedly die. Looking at this scene, a trace of fear finally emerged in Orleans' eyes. There is great terror between life and death. No matter how tough Orleans was before, when death really came, instinctive fear still overwhelmed all rationality. Seeing that he was about to die in Wonquan, at this moment, a tall black and red figure suddenly appeared behind the Scorpion. A big hand directly grabbed his neck, pulled back suddenly, and instantly threw him flying. Boom! He fell heavily on the ground. Scorpion looked up in astonishment, ignoring the pain on his body. Immediately, a black shadow troll fused with extremis virus appeared in front of his eyes. A body full of oppression, covered with black and red lines, a pair of scarlet eyes, staring at him without the slightest emotion. Seeing this scene, Scorpion's heart trembled instantly, and an uncontrollable fear rose from the bottom of his heart involuntarily. "Who are you?" Scorpion said with a full face of vigilance. Naturally, the desperate troll would not answer his words, but just looked at him quietly, which put him under great pressure. At this moment, the desperate troll who was standing quietly at the same place seemed to have received some kind of order, and its huge figure suddenly moved. Stepping forward, the next second, the impasse troll appeared directly in front of Scorpion. Seeing this scene, the pupils of Scorpion's eyes shrank instantly, and before he had time to think, he just rolled on the spot. Boom! There was a trembling sound, and the troll's foot stomped heavily on the ground where the Scorpion fell just now. The ground trembled, and a huge footprint appeared. Seeing this, Scorpion broke out in a cold sweat. Fortunately, he dodged fast, otherwise, if he was trampled down by this foot, he would be seriously injured even if he didn't die. However, the rejoicing in his heart didn't last long, and the hopeless troll, who was defeated in one blow, launched another attack. The flame pattern on his body lit up, he opened his mouth, and suddenly, a mouthful of flames came straight towards the Scorpion. Seeing this, Scorpion's expression froze, and flames also spewed out from his mouth. For a moment, a sea of flames burned between the two of them. The air sizzled under the scorching flames, and because of the fusion of the extremis virus, the flame attacks of the two couldn't do anything to the other, so they were deadlocked in midair. However, this stalemate didn't last long. Just as Scorpion was concentrating on dealing with the black shadow troll in front of him, another desperate troll quietly appeared behind him. Boom! A solid punch landed directly on his back. He was concentrating on dealing with the enemy in front of him, Scorpion, completely unaware of the situation behind him. Suddenly, a mouthful of blood spewed out of his mouth, and his whole body fell directly into the attack range of the desperate troll in front. Lai Yan, raging flames burned on him instantly, and screams came out of his mouth. For a moment, the Scorpion who was still in charge of other people's life and death just now was directly beaten into a dead dog. The seaside villa. Tony looked at this scene from the perspective of the troll in desperate situation, and the corners of his mouth suddenly turned up slightly. The black shadow troll fused with the extremis virus really lived up to his expectations. Ordinary extraordinary people are no longer their opponents, and it is not in vain to spend so much effort on them. Bring people back. Tony resisted. Immediately, on the other side, on the battlefield, the two hopeless trolls who were about to attack stopped at the same time. Seeing the Scorpion rolling on the ground, a desperate troll stepped forward like a chicken and picked him up from the ground. The next second, two desperate trolls sank directly to the ground with the Scorpion and disappeared. The battle between the desperate troll and the Scorpion was a long story, but the fight between the two sides was over in less than 10 seconds. It wasn't until the desperate troll melted into the ground with the Scorpion that everyone at the scene reacted. The members of the 10 Rings gang looked at this scene in blank dismay. Their leader was taken away, so what should they do? Continue to complete the task? Or retreat? Everyone looked at me, and I looked at you, and no one had an idea for a while. In the car, Orleans, who had escaped the catastrophe, was panting heavily, with a look of fear on his face, and at the same time looked incredulously at the ground where the extremist troll and others disappeared. As an ordinary person, it was really hard for him to understand how their huge bodies blended into the ground. However, the shock didn't last long. Soon, he regained his composure and turned to look at Cars beside him. Under Orleans' cold gaze, Cars's face was full of bitterness. He knew that he had fallen this time, and for a moment, he leaned limply on the car. At this time, outside the car, there was a sound of fighting. It was Steve and the others who had been dragged just now finally got out of the predicament, returned to the side of the convoy, and quickly cleaned up the remaining members of the Ten Rings gang. Although all three of them were seriously injured in the self-destruct of the Ten Rings supernatural beings, it was still easy to deal with these ordinary people. Soon, the screams outside the car stopped, and Steve appeared at the door. "Mr. Orleans, are you all right?" Steve cared. Orleans shook his head. "It's okay, thank you for what happened today." Hearing this, a wry smile appeared on Steve's face. Although they were trapped just now, it doesn't mean they didn't know anything about what happened just now. They witnessed the appearance of the extremist troll and took Scorpion away. It can be said that if there were no desperate trolls intervening, Orleans would have died at this moment. Similarly, their mission would naturally fail. Thinking about the terrible consequences, Steve couldn't help feeling rejoicing. However, he also had a lot of doubts in his heart. The biggest doubt was why the hopeless troll appeared here and saved Orleans. Although the appearance of the desperate trolls has changed a lot, he still recognized them as Tony's shadow core at a glance. After all, the ability to appear and disappear is only possessed by Tony's shadow core. Thinking of this, Steve glanced at the peaceful Orleans. He had a feeling that Orleans must know something, but he didn't ask too much. Although Orleans is just an ordinary person, he is a person who stands at the pinnacle of power in the United States after all. Even if he asks, as long as he doesn't want to talk, he won't get any useful information. In this case, it is better to keep doubts in mind and investigate later. "Mr. Orleans, it's not suitable to stay here for a long time, let's leave first." "Put your mind away," Steve suggested. Hearing this, Orleans nodded, and the group got into a car and left quickly. In the seaside villa, Tony sat in the living room and waited quietly. Soon, a shadow appeared on the living room floor, and the desperate troll grabbed the scorpion and rose from the ground. Casually throwing the scorpion on the ground, with a thought in Tony's mind, the impasse troll melted into the ground again and disappeared. "Tony Stark," Scorpion spoke in a weak tone, but couldn't hide the surprise in his eyes. "You know me." Tony raised an eyebrow. Hearing this, Scorpion reacted immediately, quickly lowered his head and said, "I just read about you in a magazine." "Really? Then who sent the bomb in front of my company?" "I do not know." Scorpion quickly shook his head in denial, as if I didn't know anything about it. Seeing his stubborn refusal to admit it, Tony didn't bother to continue asking. Anyway, everyone knew the truth of the matter in their hearts, so there was no need to waste time. "Tell me, where is the Mandarin?" The smile on the corner of Tony's mouth converged, and he spoke slowly. As his smile disappeared, a strong sense of oppression emanated from him immediately. If the sense of oppression on the troll in the desperate situation is like a mountain, then the sense of oppression on Tony is like the sea. He didn't feel anything when the weather was calm, but once he became serious, it was like a sea of fury, making people unable to resist at all. I don't know." Scorpion gritted his teeth and spoke firmly. At this time, a wave of mental fluctuation suddenly emanated from Tony's body, and the trance-like Scorpion was instantly controlled by Tony. Suddenly, the expression on his face became dull. "Where's the Mandarin?" Tony asked again. This time, Scorpion didn't say that he didn't know, but said in a dull tone, "We are in Zhongshan for security." Hearing this, the information of Zhongshan security quickly appeared in Tony's mind. This is a medium-sized security company headquartered in Washung Shield. Thinking of this, Tony said again, "Call him." After the words fell, the controlled Scorpion directly took out the phone on his body. This phone is obviously specially made, so it was not damaged in the previous battle. Taking out the phone, Scorpion skillfully entered a series of numbers and dialed out. Beep. A waiting sound sounded, and soon the phone was connected, and Mandarin's hoarse voice came from the phone. Is it done? After the words fell, the controlled scorpion naturally couldn't answer. Tony reached out and took the phone from him, and raised the corner of his mouth. He can't answer you now. After the words fell, Mandarin on the other end of the phone was silent for a moment. Immediately, he said unhurriedly, Who are you? You asked someone to plant a bomb in front of my company, and now you ask me who am I? Tony, it's you. How about it? Do you like the gift I gave you? I like it very much, so I plan to give you a gift in return. Tell me, what about this head called a scorpion? Tony said in a relaxed tone. But the imaginary scene of Mandarin's exasperation did not appear, and his voice was still too calm. I don't like his head, but if you want to kill it, you can kill it. It's just a waste. If you die, you can die. As soon as these words came out, Tony frowned immediately, knowing more about Mandarin. This guy is not a normal person, he doesn't even care about his confidants. By the way, I have a woman here. I don't know if you are interested. It seems to be Maya. Mandarin suddenly said. Suddenly, Tony frowned involuntarily. He really didn't know that Maya had fallen into the hands of the Mandarin. Seeing Mandarin threatening him with Maya, Tony sneered disdainfully, Kill him if you want, she is the only one who can make the extremis virus, as long as you are willing, then kill her. Tony didn't care about Maya at all, and she was only kept for the sake of having someone ready to make the extremis virus. If Maya is killed, the big deal is to let Reed and the others do research, and it is not difficult to create a virus. Therefore, the threat of Mandarin doesn't matter to him at all. And Mandarin was obviously choked by these words, and didn't speak for a while. However, Tony was no longer interested in playing charades with him, so he said directly, I'll wait for you at Niayu. If you don't come, I'll kill this guy. Remember to bring Maya in exchange. After finishing speaking, Tony didn't care whether he answered or not, and hung up the phone directly. Zhongshan Security Building. Listening to the busy tone from the phone, a gloomy look flashed in Mandarin's eyes. The phone that was originally held in his hand was instantly shattered into pieces with the sudden force of his palm. As he said on the phone, he doesn't care about Scorpion's life or death, but he hates being threatened. At that moment, a sneer appeared on the corner of his mouth, Wait for me at Niayu. Then I'll go see you. I would like to see what tricks you can play. At the same time, in the seaside villa, the moment Tony hung up the phone, a cold electronic synthesis sound suddenly sounded in his mind. Ding! The branch mission is released, the battle of the old enemy. Mission content. Kill the old enemy, the King of Darkness does not need an old enemy, only a servant. Task reward. Draw a lottery once, and open a new category lottery. Hearing the voice that suddenly sounded in his mind, the expression on Tony's face suddenly froze. He has long been used to the system playing dead every day. Except for the increase in the number of members of the Dark Alliance, he never thought that the system would release tasks, and he became interested in it for a while. Looking carefully at the quest description and quest rewards, Tony's eyes flashed with anticipation, opening a new category of lucky draw. What will it be? Magical energy, mask, or something from another world? Thinking excitedly, it took a while for Tony to calm down again. He originally wanted to kill the Mandarin, but now that there are system tasks, his determination to kill the Mandarin is even stronger. Glancing at the sluggish scorpion in front of him, a flame suddenly appeared in Tony's palm. With a casual throw, the flame fell directly on him. Pong! In an instant, the flames burned directly. Compared with the flames brought by the extremis virus, Tony's flames are naturally more domineering. In just a few short breaths, the scorpion was burned to ashes. Then Tony's telekinetic power manipulated ashes, and directly scattered his ashes into the sea. This guy's role has ended, and it's useless to keep it. As for changing Maya, it's a joke. He never thought of exchanging from the beginning to the end. If he didn't die, he would save it, and he didn't feel sorry if he died. Therefore, it is useless to keep the scorpion. Shield, Nick's office, he's answering Steve's call right now. During the phone call, Steve recounted everything that happened during the operation, including Tony's meddling, and his suspicions about Tony. Nick frowned instantly when he heard that Tony was involved. He is completely afraid of Tony now. Even hearing his name gives me a headache. However, Tony took the initiative to help Orleans, which made him puzzled. Therefore, after hanging up the phone, Nick sat up in the office chair directly, thinking about Tony's motives and purposes. After thinking for a long time, Nick finally couldn't figure it out, so he could only temporarily suppress his doubts in his heart. But there is one thing, no matter what Tony wants to do, it is necessary to strengthen his own strength. The death of Venom and Flint has greatly reduced the strength of S.H.I.E.L.D. So without staying in the office for long, Nick drove away from S.H.I.E.L.D. alone and went to Maria Hospital. He didn't forget the 3 people he snatched from Tony. Although the 3 hadn't shown anything special, after finding out Reed's identity, he already had a hunch. It is very likely that they are extraordinary people, otherwise Tony would not have to go there himself. And today was the day they were discharged from the hospital, so he deliberately put aside everything and came to pick them up in person. Soon, the car stopped at the entrance of the hospital, and Nick strode into the hospital. But when he came outside the ward, he noticed a strange atmosphere. All the medical staff avoided this ward one by one, with a trace of fear in their eyes. Seeing this, Nick's heart moved. Did something happen? Thinking silently in his heart, Nick's expression changed suddenly, and he quickly walked into the ward. At that moment, the scene in the ward suddenly appeared in front of his eyes. Johnny and Susan sat beside Ben and comforted him. Ben sat on the hospital bed without saying a word, staring blankly at the ceiling. Of course, these are not important. What is really surprising is his body at the moment. I saw that his body was like a rock, full of marks from head to toe. Especially his body, which has grown several times compared to before, combined with his appearance, looks like a monster. Seeing this, a gleam of joy flashed in Nick's eyes immediately. Others didn't know what was going on. How could Nick, who has been dealing with extraordinary people for many years, not be clear? This is awakening. Although he had predicted it in his heart before, after actually witnessing it, Nick still had the feeling of winning a lottery ticket. Thinking of this, Nick's excited voice suddenly sounded in the ward. "Hey, guys, what's the matter with you? You are frowning." Hearing the voice, Johnny and the others immediately came to their senses. Seeing Nick's arrival, Johnny and Susan hurriedly got up and said, "Hello, sir. Don't be so cautious, why do you all look in a bad mood?" Nick waved his hand and spoke kindly. Hearing this, Johnny and Susan glanced at Ben with wry smiles on their faces. Ben also looked back at Nick at this moment and said sadly, "I became a monster." After the words fell, Nick immediately retorted, "Who said you were a monster?" When this remark came out, Ben couldn't help being taken aback. Since the gauze was removed this morning, he could feel the disgusted eyes of everyone looking at him. Everyone regarded him as a monster, and Nick was the first to refute. And Nick's words continued at this moment, "You are not a monster, you just gained power that others don't have. As long as you use this power reasonably, you are not only not a monster, but also a hero in this world. Follow me, I will make you a hero in this world, and no one can call you a monster." Nick said sincerely, with a calm look in his eyes. Hearing this, the originally quiet heart suddenly beat violently, and a sense of unwillingness rose in his heart. "Yes, I am not a monster. I want to be a hero, let everyone respect." Thinking in his heart, Ben's eyes suddenly filled with spirit again. In the original book, he became taciturn because of his low self-esteem in appearance. Now, Nick saw through his low self-esteem and helped him break it in advance. "I understand, sir, I will definitely clear my name," Ben said with a firm tone. Nick nodded with a smile, and then turned his attention to Johnny and Susan. "Well, have you changed anything?" Listening to Nick's words, the two originally planned to hide the mutation in themselves, but after seeing Nick's attitude towards Ben, Johnny and Susan decided to tell the truth. At the moment, the two also performed their superpowers respectively. A fire control, a stealth, are very powerful. This made Nick completely happy, and his whole expression became excited. The addition of 3 supernatural beings not only restored the strength of S.H.I.E.L.D. to its peak, but even made it faintly stronger. Without staying in the hospital, Nick picked up the 3 and left the hospital directly to return to S.H.I.E.L.D. All 3 of them have just awakened, and they are not proficient in mastering their abilities. They need more practice. Fortunately, S.H.I.E.L.D. has experience in this field, not only has a lot of training equipment, but also has dedicated guidance. And just as the strength of S.H.I.E.L.D. strengthened again, at this moment, Mandarin finally returned to New York. Without going anywhere else, Mandarin returned to New York and went straight to Tony's seaside villa. No one can provoke him and get away with it. All those who provoked him must use blood to make amends. For ordinary people, Tony's residence is a secret, but for some people with status, it is not difficult to investigate Tony's residence. Soon, a convoy stopped outside the seaside villa. Inside the villa, just as Mandarin and the others arrived, Tony also received a reminder from Jarvis. "Sir, someone is coming. It seems that the person coming is not good. Do you need to make a defensive warning?" "Need not." Tony stopped Jarvis from calling the police, and walked out of the villa alone. Because of the system task, Tony, who originally planned to let the crowd beat the Mandarin, gave up this idea and planned to solve him himself. Push open the door of the villa and walk out, through the courtyard outside the villa, and soon, Mandarin and his party appeared in Tony's sight. Similarly, Tony's figure also appeared in front of Mandarin. Seeing Tony walking slowly, Mandarin looked him up and down coldly, eyes full of scrutiny. As if wondering where he got the courage to challenge himself. But after watching for a long time, apart from his extraordinary demeanor, Tony was just an ordinary person. For a while, Mandarin couldn't help but slightly raised his eyebrows. Soon, Tony walked out of the gate of the villa and stood in front of everyone. Looking at the Mandarin with a gloomy temperament on his body, Tony folded his hands and asked, "Did Maya bring it?" After saying that, Mandarin turned his head and glanced at Norris beside him. Immediately, Norris hurriedly asked someone to bring down a woman from the car, which was Maya. "Where are my people?" Mandarin asked. Although he didn't care, since it was an exchange, he had to see if the person was right. "Oh, I was killed." Tony didn't hide, just spoke directly. As soon as these words came out, the atmosphere at the scene suddenly fell into a dead silence. "Ha ha ha." Mandarin's hoarse laughter sounded, but his eyes became more and more cold. No one can provoke him again and again, no one can. "Interesting. I haven't met such an interesting person as you for a long time. Have you figured out how to die? I can give you a chance to choose." Mandarin's voice sounded slowly, and for a while, only his voice echoed around the empty villa. Tony raised his eyebrows, and the corners of his mouth also raised. "My life is hard, even God can't take it away. If you have the ability, then come." With that said, Tony spread his hands, full of provocation. Hearing this, Mandarin didn't speak anymore, and directly raised his hand. The ring on the index finger of his left hand lit up, and a red light beam burst out from his index finger instantly. At the same time, Tony's eyes lit up, and two beams of light also bombarded from his eyes. Boom! A loud explosion sounded. The energy beams emitted by the two collided fiercely in midair. A violent explosion flooded the space, separating the two. Watching this scene, Mandarin's expression changed, and the ring on his left ring finger instantly lit up. Immediately, his spirit was greatly enhanced, and a mental storm directly rushed towards Tony's position. Ordinary people, in the face of spiritual attacks from invisible substances, are bound to be hit, but Tony, who has fused the sheep charm, has also reached a terrifying level of spirituality. Therefore, just after the Mandarin's mental shock approached Tony, it was immediately sensed by Tony. At that moment, with a thought in Tony's mind, his tyrannical mental power suddenly hit him head-on. Boom! There was a soundless collision, and blood suddenly flowed from the Mandarin's mouth and nose on the other side. The spiritual confrontation is the most dangerous. He didn't expect Tony to be proficient in the spiritual way, so he was caught off guard and suffered serious injuries. But Mandarin is also a ruthless person, resisting the pain in his mind, and continued to activate the skills on the ring. Cutting beam, black body ray, lightning storm, flame explosion, the skills on the 10 rings were constantly activated by him. Horrific explosions sounded continuously. In just a short moment of fighting, a huge pit has appeared where the two confront each other. As for Norris and the others, they had already retreated far away as early as the moment they started fighting, and they could not intervene in a battle of this level at all. It's even hard to get close. On the battlefield, using the mental barrier to block Mandarin's skills again, Tony's gaze at Mandarin also became serious. This guy's strength is not bad, which makes him feel a little bit pained. The main reason is that he has too many skills, which makes him a little overwhelmed. However, although Mandarin's strength is not bad, his weakness is also relatively obvious. He completely relies on the 10 rings in his hand. If he doesn't have the rings, his own strength is not worth mentioning at all. So, soon, Tony had a plan of action in his mind. Seeing that Mandarin activated his skills again, Tony suddenly moved and disappeared from Mandarin's sight in an instant. Seeing this, Mandarin immediately became vigilant, but before he could take precautions, Tony appeared directly in front of him in the next second. Looking at Tony, who was close at hand with a look of shock, Mandarin just wanted to speak, but Tony smiled at him, and the next second, he grabbed his hand. Seeing this, he didn't know what Tony wanted to do, so he clenched his fists instantly. But he obviously underestimated Tony's strength. Tony, who had fused the cow charm, was so powerful that he couldn't resist it at all. Therefore, with a sharp pain in his fingers, the 2 rings on his right hand were pulled off by Tony. "Give me back the ring!" Mandarin roared angrily, and at the same time raised his hand to launch an ice storm, trying to freeze Tony. But Tony's body suddenly burst into flames, which directly dispelled the ice, and quickly opened the distance from him. Stopping his figure, Tony looked at the 2 rings on his hand, a trace of curiosity flashed in his eyes. Immediately put the 2 rings on his hands, wanting to feel some of the power of the rings. However, apart from a burst of coldness, Tony didn't feel the special power on the ring, and suddenly frowned. And Mandarin watched his movements, and immediately said mockingly, "Don't dream, the Lord of the Rings can't be used by anyone except me." After the words fell, Tony looked up at him, with a smile on the corner of his mouth. "Really? I can't see it. Kill you, I don't believe it can't be used." After speaking, Tony's figure disappeared in place again. With the first lesson learned, almost the moment Tony disappeared, Mandarin released various lasers to bombard the surrounding air, trying to prevent Tony from approaching in this way. However, his reaction speed couldn't keep up with Tony. When he released the skill, Tony didn't approach at all, but when the skill ended, Tony appeared in front of him and continued to violently snatch the ring, which was completely rogue. Soon, 3 more rings fell into Tony's hands. Mandarin's 10 fingers, which were originally full of rings, now only had 2 on his left hand and 3 on his right hand. Mandarin was mad with anger, but there was nothing he could do about Tony. Even, a touch of fear grew in his heart. He can always be high above, relying on the magic ring in his hand. Once the magic ring is taken away, he will be finished. Thinking of this, Mandarin suddenly felt the intention to retreat. Immediately, he gave Tony a resentful look, and turned around and left. Not far away, Tony watched this scene, with a trace of mockery flashing across his face. "Come as soon as you say, and leave as soon as you say. Do you think I'm a clay sculpture?" After the words fell, Tony's figure disappeared again, and the power of the rabbit charm was exerted to the extreme by him, and the speed of the whole person could be compared to that of light. Mandarin only took 2 steps, and Tony appeared in front of him again. He clenched his fists subconsciously, tightly protecting the ring on his hand. But this time Tony didn't snatch the ring again, and just punched him in the face. Boom! The Mandarin, who hadn't expected it at all, was blown away by Tony's punch without any defense. He fell heavily to the ground, and just as he was about to struggle to stand up, Tony's figure reappeared beside him and stepped on his chest. Click! There was a sound of bone cracking, and Tony didn't mean to show mercy at all, and broke his sternum with 1 foot. Cough! A violent cough came from Mandarin's mouth, and a lot of blood leaked from his mouth and nose. Staring fixedly at Tony, Mandarin's eyes were full of resentment and unwillingness. He opened his mouth to say something, but his mouth was full of blood, which made him unable to speak a word. In the end, he could only make a cooing sound. Seeing Mandarin's appearance of breathing in too much and not letting out, Tony took off the remaining 5 rings from his hand under his staring eyes. Then he said in a relaxed tone, "It's hard to see you alive, let me see you off for the last time." After speaking, Tony raised his foot, and the anger in Mandarin's eyes was quickly replaced by panic. In the past, such eyes would only appear on his prey, and he never thought that he would show such eyes one day. It can only be said that the way of heaven is reincarnation. Boom! Without any accident, Tony stepped on Mandarin's chest directly. Seeing the life in his eyes completely dissipate, Tony turned to look at Norris and the others not far away. They witnessed the scene of Mandarin's death with their own eyes, and everyone's faces were filled with fear for a while. In the past, the Mandarin was a god in their eyes, and there was nothing he couldn't do, but now that the god was dead, the Godslayer turned his gaze to them, and immediately, everyone turned around and ran away in horror. Regarding these miscellaneous fish, Tony naturally did not have the desire to do it himself, but with a thought, the shadow core suddenly appeared in front of Tony. Not a single one. After the words fell, the shadow core jumped to catch up with Norris and the others, setting off a massacre. Handing over the rest to the shadow core, Tony turned and walked towards Maya. Maya tensed up as Tony approached. She knew that Tony was very strong, and she and Killian were no match for Tony when they teamed up before, but the battle between Tony and the Mandarin just now overturned her cognition. The two of them are like gods, with endless methods, and they can burst out great power with every gesture. Such strength made her face Tony as if she was looking at a god walking in the world, and she could no longer treat it with a normal heart. Mr. Tony. Maya lowered her head and used honorifics. Looking at Maya's bound hands, Tony raised his hand, and an invisible force cut through the rope on her hand. Pay attention to your own safety in the future, you are not so lucky to be saved every time. Tony said calmly. Maya nodded immediately. I understand, Mr. Tony. Go back and continue producing the extremis virus. After saying that, Tony turned and walked towards the villa. But just as he turned around, Maya's voice suddenly came from behind. Does Mr. Tony need to rest? I have learned a little massage technique, which can help you relax from fatigue. Maya said with a rosy face, and seeing Tony turn to look at her, she couldn't help lowering her head. Seeing this, a playful smile appeared on the corner of Tony's mouth. As a sea king, how could Tony not understand the meaning of her words? He looked her up and down, although the dust on her face made her look a little embarrassed. But it is still hard to hide her beautiful face and curvy figure. Especially the mountain peaks in front of her chest are simply towering into the sky. Okay, come on. Nodding his head, Tony continued to walk towards the villa, while Maya quickly followed after getting the consent, and walked into the villa together. As for the corpses outside the villa, Tony doesn't need to worry about it, the Shadow Corps will naturally clean up the battlefield. It can be said that it is very convenient to drag the corpse into the Shadow Kingdom, and it will be swallowed by dark creatures in minutes. On the second floor of the villa, in the room, Maya took a shower in the bathroom, while Tony changed into a nightgown and sat on the bed, checking the system information. Mission: Battle of the Enemy. Task progress completed. Task reward: draw a lottery once, and open a new category lottery. After he killed the mandolin, the mission was completed, but he didn't have time to pay attention to it at the time, and now he is in the mood to check the mission information when he is free. There is nothing to say about the lottery draw. I have drawn more than once. What interests him is the opening of new categories. I don't know which aspect of the item the system will open this time. While thinking about it, he opened the lottery roulette. Unlike before, he saw that there was an extra option on the lottery roulette. One of them is naturally the spell roulette, which specializes in the production of spells, and the other category is the magic roulette, which is a newly opened category. Seeing this scene, Tony's eyes lit up. Devil energy, which comes from the devil, is the original power of the devil. By fusing the devil energy, one can obtain the power of the devil, which immediately moved Tony's heart. Looking at the number of lucky draws that were only once, Tony looked back and forth between the spell roulette and the magic roulette for several times, and finally chose the magic roulette. Start, I muttered silently in my heart, and suddenly, the pointer on the magic energy dial started to spin rapidly. After it felt almost the same, Tony started to stop. At that moment, the speed of the pointer began to slow down, and gradually fixed on a lotus flower. Immediately, the lotus flew out of the roulette, shot towards Tony, and instantly merged into his body. At that moment, a mighty force washed over his body, making his physical body stronger. At the same time, Tony also felt that he had gained a lot of strength. Opening his eyes, Tony looked at the water glass on the table not far away, and suddenly raised his hand to grab it in the air. Suddenly, the water glass flew into his hand as if pulled by an inexplicable force. Seeing this, the corner of Tony's mouth was full of smiles. The lotus flower represents the moon demon Curse Blue, and the power of Curse Blue is to control gravity. As one of the four basic forces, gravity is everywhere, and wherever there is gravity, it is Tony's home field. Even, Tony's full control of gravity can completely reach the level of the mantra in the anime, moving the trajectory of the moon. So, how could Tony not be happy? It can be said that the magic energy of Jalan alone has made his strength rise a big step. It is impossible to imagine how strong he will be when he gathers the 8 demonic energy and the 12 charms in one body. Just as Tony was thinking about it, suddenly the bathroom door opened, and Maya came out wrapped in a bathrobe. Due to the fact that she had just taken a bath, traces of heat rose from her body, and her cheeks became even more rosy, like a red apple, which made people want to take a bite. Looking at the beauty coming out of the water, Tony was not polite, and directly used the gravity he had just obtained to pull Maya over. In the underground research room, Loki sighed helplessly when he heard the strange voice again. He felt that it was necessary for him to change to another place to do research. Who could bear this every day? Shaking his head, Loki used his strength to block the inexplicable voice, and continued to study his own things. Hurry up, soon, the research of this god will be completed. As he spoke, a trace of excitement flashed across Loki's eyes and face. In the eyes of others, what he is studying is artificial intelligence, but only he himself knows that what he is studying is life, a life that emerges from nothing. Just when the Mandarin incident came to an end, at this moment, another country that is extremely far away from the United States. Eagle Country. Jane Foster discovers a time-distorting force field in an abandoned building. As an astrophysicist, Jane is full of curiosity about all mysterious forces, so she immediately stepped into the abandoned building. And just after she stepped into this mysterious force field, she didn't know that she left the earth in an instant and appeared in the underground of Asa God's domain. The ground of God's domain was dark, and soon, a pool of dark red transparent solid appeared in Jane's sight, which was as beautiful as agate crystal. Seeing this scene, Jane subconsciously reached out to touch it, but when her hand touched the dark red transparent solid, something happened suddenly, and the dark red transparent solid melted into her body. A powerful shock hit her heart, and Jane fainted almost without resistance. Soon, all the dark red transparent solids melted into her body, and the mysterious force field disappeared. Immediately, Jane returned to Earth from God's domain. After being found fainted by her assistant, she was sent to the hospital directly. And just after the dark red solid disappeared, Heimdall, the guardian of Asgard, felt an instant sensation. He is the patron saint of God's domain, responsible for guarding the Rainbow Bridge and controlling the portal of God's domain. At the same time, he was also given a duty by Odin to guard the reality gem, one of the infinite gems. With Heimdall's eye that perceives everything, he can see everything and hear everything, similar to the combination of clairvoyance and windeyer in Eastern mythology. But just now he discovered that the ether particles changed by the reality gem disappeared. Suddenly, the expression on Heimdall's face changed instantly. What happened? Disappeared. Heimdall was full of doubts, and disappeared in place in a flash. When he reappeared, he had already appeared in the place where the ether particles were sealed. Looking at the already empty underground palace, Heimdall's expression suddenly became extremely ugly. A force of perception centered on him, quickly spread in all directions, hundreds of thousands of miles, millions of miles, tens of thousands of miles. Perceptions continued to spread, covering the vast territory of God's domain, but even so, he did not find any traces of ether particles, as if they had disappeared out of thin air. For a moment, Heimdall was shocked and angry, and at the same time, he was also thinking about who had the ability to steal ether particles under his nose. Unfortunately, after thinking about it for a long time, he still has no idea, but the ether particles are very important. Since he can't find them, he can only tell God King Odin about it. After clearing his mind, Heimdall quickly disappeared into the underground palace without delay, heading towards the Asgard where Odin lived. As the ruler of God's domain, Odin's residence, the vastness of Asgard far exceeds the imagination of the world. Large tracts of palaces stretched above the sky, and the golden afterglow shone on the fairy palace, filling the fairy palace with a warm and peaceful atmosphere. When Heimdall saw Odin in Asgard, a look of guilt appeared on his face. "Wong, I'm not doing well, please punish me." The ether particles in the underground palace disappeared. As soon as these words came out, Odin, who was sitting high on the throne, his figure shrouded in brilliance and couldn't see the specific figure, suddenly sounded surprised. Ether particles disappeared. Didn't you even notice it? Odin's tone was a little curious. Although he is the king of the gods, when it comes to perception, even he is inferior to Heimdall. Otherwise, he would not have canonized Hildum as the patron saint. I just want him to use his powerful perception ability to protect the realm of the gods. Listening to Odin's words, Heimdall was even more ashamed, but he didn't defend himself, but bowed his head again and begged for punishment. I also ask my king to come down. After the words fell, Odin waved his hand immediately. I don't blame you for this matter. Even your perception ability can be concealed. This matter may not be simple. Let me make some calculations. After finishing speaking, Odin fell into silence, and Heimdall also waited quietly below without saying a word to disturb. As the king of gods, Odin is not only powerful and belongs to the top powerhouse in the universe, he is also proficient in various abilities, including the technique of calculation. As long as there is no special defense or absolute strength, there is no way to resist Odin's calculations. Soon, a terrifying wave of energy permeated the Asgard. Heimdall, who was standing below, felt this vast power, and looked at Odin on the throne with even more awe. Intense energy fluctuations come and go quickly. Soon, Odin stopped and gave an answer at the same time. According to my calculations, the ether particles are no longer in God's domain, but in Blue Star. After the words fell, Heimdall's face suddenly showed joy. As the patron saint, the combination of Schunfanger and clairvoyance, as long as there is a target, he can find things as quickly as possible. So, just after Odin's voice fell, Heimdall moved instantly. Immeasurable divine light bloomed in his eyes, and his eyes passed through layers of space in the endless vacuum universe, and fell directly on the Blue Star. For a while, most of the people on Blue Star appeared in his eyes. But unfortunately, he did not find traces of ether particles. Seeing this, the ray of hope that had just risen in Heimdall's heart was immediately extinguished like a flame. Heimdall looked at Odin on the throne in astonishment, and couldn't help but wonder if your calculation was wrong. But he knew that Odin was infinitely powerful, and it was basically impossible to make a mistake, so he didn't know what to say when the words came to his lips. However, Odin on the throne saw through Heimdall's thoughts at a glance, and immediately said in a flat tone, I can't make a mistake. You didn't notice it. It should be because your distance is too far, and the ether particles actively shield your perception. Unless you are on the same planet, otherwise you will be separated from the vast starry sky. As long as it has a heart, you will naturally not be able to find anything. Listening to Odin's explanation, Heimdall's face revealed a hint of sudden realization, and he patted his chest and said, Don't worry, my king, I'm going to Blue Star right now, and I'll definitely bring back ether particles. After the words fell, Odin, who was sitting on the throne, did not agree. I remember that Sol seems to be staying at the Blue Star. That's right, Heimdall said proactively. Since this is the case, then leave this matter to him, let him find the person who stole the ether particles as soon as possible, and send them to God's domain. Hearing this arrangement, although Heimdall was a little disappointed because he couldn't make the trip himself. But I also know that the sooner this kind of thing must be, the better, otherwise it will take too long, and no one knows if there will be new changes in the matter. Shield, the training room. At this moment Thor is sitting cross-legged in the training room, meditating constantly. As a god, divine power is his source of power. The amount of divine power determines his lower limit of combat power, while divine weapons and divine skills determine his upper limit of combat power. Ever since he realized his own lack of strength, Sol has been working hard, meditating in his spare time to increase his divine power. There is a saying, you have to work hard quietly, and then surprise everyone. Obviously, Sol belongs to this category of people. It's a pity that the improvement of strength does not happen overnight. Although he works hard enough, it is impossible for him to suddenly increase his strength. What's more, because of Tony, he didn't capture Loki back to God's domain, and he didn't participate in the battle against the Nine Kingdoms to counter the rebellion. He lacked some experience, and his current strength may be slightly weaker than the original book. And just when he was immersed in meditation, suddenly, the light in his mind was full of light, and a figure full of light all over his body suddenly appeared in Sol's mind. There was a sacred and unpredictable temperament exuding from the person who came, and his every move was full of divine power. Immediately, Saul's expression changed, and he quickly bowed his head respectfully and said, "Father Saul, long time no see." Odin specifically sent down a divine sense to inform Saul. "How is your mission going? How is Loki doing now?" Odin did not directly explain the mission, but first asked about the previous mission. Hearing this, a hint of shame suddenly appeared on Saul's face. "Sorry, father, I haven't caught Loki yet, his strength has become stronger. Therefore, the task has not been completed yet," Saul said with a guilty conscience, with some helplessness in his tone. He didn't expect that, seeing Loki again, his strength would increase so much. In addition, the strength of S.H.I.E.L.D. was not as good as the original book, and Tony was still on Loki's side, which caused his mission to fail completely. Hearing this, Odin was also silent for a while, as if he didn't expect the ending of the matter to be like this. Fortunately, he was in a good state of mind and did not blame Saul. After all, both are his sons, and it's normal for one to lose to the other. He can't just get off the field and pull a sideways fight. He can only encourage him, "Don't be discouraged, Thor, and explore your own strength. Sooner or later, you will be able to defeat Loki." "Yes, my father." Saul nodded, and the whole person became high-spirited again. At this time, Odin finally talked about the business of this trip. "Saul, there is one thing you need to do now. The sealed object of God's domain has disappeared. According to my calculations, it is now on Blue Star. You must find it, or its host, and bring it back to God's domain. This matter is very important and must be completed as soon as possible." Odin spoke very seriously, and his tone was very serious. Although Saul didn't know what happened, he felt a bit of solemnity from his words. At the moment, Saul nodded heavily, taking this matter to heart. "I understand, my Lord Father, I will find it quickly and send it back to God's domain as soon as possible." After finishing speaking, the father and son communicated for a while, and finally, Odin's divine thoughts dissipated in Thor's mind. With Odin gone, Saul opened his eyes. Saul has no clue about finding the sealed thing in God's domain. Although Odin told him the characteristics of some ether particles and the reaction after fusion, with Blue Star's population, trying to find people according to their characteristics in the vast sea of people is completely like finding a needle in a haystack. If Saul was alone, he really didn't have the confidence to complete this task. Fortunately, he was never alone, and behind him stood S.H.I.E.L.D. As the most powerful organization in the United States, S.H.I.E.L.D. was established in the last century, and has already built its own intelligence network all over the world. With their strength, it is far easier and easier than Saul himself to find someone in the vast crowd. So, after opening his eyes, Saul left the training room directly and walked towards Nick's office. Boom boom boom. There was a knock on the door, and Nick's voice came from the office. "Please come in." After the words fell, Saul pushed the door open and entered. Seeing him, a smile appeared on Nick's face behind the desk. "Saul, why are you here? I still plan to find you." As soon as these words came out, Saul was stunned, "Looking for me? What's the matter?" "Something happened to Jane Foster," Nick said in a flat tone, and Saul's face suddenly changed. If talking about who is the most important to him on Blue Star, it must be Jane. Hearing that something happened to her at this moment, a powerful aura emanated from Saul in an instant. Seeing this, Nick's eyelids twitched violently, and he quickly said, "Don't get excited about Saul, Jane is fine now, she just passed out suddenly and was sent to the hospital. Now awake and out of danger." Hearing this, Saul's originally turbulent mood immediately calmed down a lot, but after calming down, Saul couldn't help frowning when he looked at Nick. Jane and S.H.I.E.L.D. have nothing to do with each other. How did Nick know that something happened to her? Looking at the suspicion on Saul's face, Nick, who is a human being, didn't know what he was thinking, so he continued to explain. "Don't get me wrong, I'm not monitoring her, I'm protecting her safety. After all, you have been in contact with her, and many people know about it. I'm also afraid that someone will threaten you with the relationship between her and you, so I specially asked someone to protect her. If you think it's wrong, then I'll let people evacuate now." Nick spoke frankly, without any guilt in his eyes, which showed that what he said was true. Seeing this scene, Sol's face gradually relaxed. It's okay, keep protecting her. Where is she now? I'll go and see her. Hearing this, Nick gave the address, and then said, Tell me, what do you want from me? How do you know that I have something to do with you? Sol was a little surprised. The corner of Nick's mouth suddenly curled up into a smile. You guys, you don't go to the 3 Treasure Hall for anything, unless there is something wrong. Whoever came to my office to look for me. Okay. Sol scratched his head. Immediately, he quickly said what Odin ordered, and asked Nick to use the intelligence network of S.H.I.E.L.D. to help him find it. Nick naturally has no objection to Sol's request. Not to mention that Sol worked for S.H.I.E.L.D. for free during this period, and he worked hard without credit. Even considering Sol's status as the Prince of God's domain, Nick would try his best to establish a good relationship with him. Therefore, in the face of his request, Nick naturally would not shirk. And after he agreed to this matter, the relationship between the two suddenly became much closer. But because he was worried about Jane, Sol didn't stay too long, and left Nick's office after finishing talking. Eagle Country, Wheel Squatting Airport. A plane from the United States landed quickly, and a tall young man got off the plane with the crowd. Sol, who already knew Jane's exact location, took a taxi straight to the hospital after leaving the airport. Soon, at the door of the hospital ward, Sol took a deep breath nervously, hesitated for a long time, and finally pushed the door and walked in. In the ward, Jane was recuperating on the hospital bed, and the female assistant was taking care of her. When she saw Sol who entered the door, the female assistant was stunned for a moment, and subconsciously got up to stop her. Who are you? After the words fell, Jane opened her eyes on the bed. When she saw the face that she had been thinking about day and night, Jane suddenly trembled, and 2 lines of tears flowed down directly. Since Thor returned to God's domain last time, the two sides haven't seen each other again, and when Sol comes again, he has been busy with extraordinary events due to complicated affairs, and has not seen Jane. Goodbye now. Apart from excitement, Jane also has a lot of blame in her heart. For a moment, the atmosphere in the ward became weird. The female assistant obviously noticed this. Except for the first sentence she said, she completely curled up in a corner to reduce her sense of existence. Complaints, quarrels, explanations, and the conflicting attitudes of ordinary couples are repeated on the two of them. Although the plot is cliched, the female assistant who is a melon-eating crowd enjoys it with gusto. It was not easy for the two to reconcile as before. At this moment, there was a knock on the door, and 2 police officers walked in. Hello, is this Jane Foster's ward? We received a report from someone saying that you were attacked and unconscious, so we came here to investigate and make a record. After saying that, Jane frowned, and immediately turned to look at the female assistant beside her. Under her gaze, the female assistant shrank her head. I called the police. When I saw you unconscious, I was so nervous that I called the police. Hearing this, a wry smile appeared on Jane's face. The female assistant was doing it for her own good. In this case, she couldn't blame her at all. At the moment, he could only say to the 2 police officers, I am Jane Foster. I was not attacked. I just accidentally fell and passed out. Please run there yourself. Jane explained that she wasn't telling the truth. She was very curious about the place and planned to explore it after she was discharged from the hospital. If the truth was told, that place might be blocked, which was not what she wanted to see. Hearing this, the 2 policemen looked at each other and shrugged helplessly. Although a little helpless, since the parties said they were fine, they could only go back the same way. However, as a punishment for reporting falsely to the police, the female assistant was fined. After dismissing the 2 police officers, Sultan, who had been silent by the side, sat by the hospital bed and reached out to grab Jane's little hand outside the quilt, intending to express his feelings in this way. But just when his palm was about to touch Jane, suddenly a dark red light flashed across Jane, and immediately, Sol's palm was directly bounced away. Seeing this scene, not only Sol was stunned, but even Jane's expression became dull. The female assistant looked at this scene in shock, and stammered, "Oh my God. What's going on?" The female assistant's words did not attract the attention of the 2 of them. At this moment, Sol and Jane were lost in thought. Jane was thinking about what was going on, and her memory kept going back, and soon locked on the dark red substance she had touched. At the moment, Saul only has one sentence in his mind that MMP doesn't know whether to say it or not. Could it be such a coincidence that my father asked me to look for the sealed artifact, but I found traces of the sealed artifact on my girlfriend? The dark red light just now was clearly the same as the sealed item described by Odin. Thinking of this, Saul looked at Jane, took a deep breath and said, "Jane, you have to tell me what's going on. This matter is very important and related to your life. You must tell the truth." Looking at Saul's serious face, Jane also realized the seriousness of the matter, and immediately told everything about what happened to her in an uneasy tone, without hiding anything. After listening, Saul felt even more headache. So he didn't find any useful information from Jane's words. But he also knew that Jane was no wonder. After all, she was just an ordinary person. "You should take a good rest first. What is on your body is not simple. Please don't tell others. Wait for me to help you deal with it." After finishing speaking, Saul didn't mention this matter again, and just kept chatting with Jane like this, until after Jane fell asleep, he walked out of the ward, standing at the window at the end of the corridor, and a trace of confusion flashed in his eyes. If it were someone else who had fused the sealed item of God's domain, then he would definitely bring him back to God's domain without saying a word. But the one who fused the sealed item turned out to be Jane, so he couldn't be so hasty. After all, no one knew how Odin would deal with Jane, which made him dare not even ask Odin rashly. Otherwise, what would Odin do if he asked him to take her back directly? And it won't work just letting it go, because he doesn't understand the sealed item, and he doesn't know the danger of the sealed item. Of course, he can also take a gamble, betting that the sealed item is harmless and can even bring benefits to others, but he obviously cannot afford to gamble. After all, Jane is his most important person on Blue Star. Therefore, he had to find someone who had nothing to do with Odin, but who knew about the sealed item, so he could decide what to do next. And such a person, on Blue Star, he can only think of one, and that is Loki. Compared with him, a war madman, Loki knows more about some other knowledge than him. Although the relationship between the two is not very good, but for Jane, he is willing to bow his head. Making a decision in his heart, Saul found a female assistant and told him that he had something to deal with, and asked her to take good care of Jane, and then flew back to the United States overnight. Niu made an appointment at the airport, got off the plane, and Saul took a taxi directly to Liberty City. There's always been an eye on Loki's dynamic shield, knowing he's staying with Tony. It's just that because of fear, S.H.I.E.L.D. has always regarded it as ignorant. When he came to the seaside villa, Tony received a reminder from Jarvis immediately in the villa. "Sir, a guest is here." After saying that, Tony frowned. He hadn't had any guests here for a while. Who would come to him at this point? While thinking about it, Tony opened his mouth and said, "Jarvis, open the door, please come in." "Okay, sir," Jarvis responded, and immediately, Saul just walked to the door of the villa. Before he could knock on the door of the villa opened, and Jarvis' voice sounded instantly. "Sir, please come in. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more."